your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Chrissie is hilarious.
Chrissie, have you ever heard of the comedian Basha K. Ali?
No, that sounds like something you yell at before you blow up a plane.
Basha K. Ali!
30 seconds remaining.
But you know what, good thing to say, I dabbled in stand-up for something. I haven't been disrespectful to you at all.
I was very confused by the title, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that's also what we call it when Ash takes off his shirt. I shouldn't be up here. I should be in school on the other side of the ocean. Hello. What's up, boys and girls? Welcome to another episode of the Chrissie Mayr podcast. We're everywhere. iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Rockfin, Rumble, all the great places where podcasts are sold. Guys, I want to do the timing could not have better for our guest today with what's popping off and the news that's been all over Twitter today. So I'm very excited to bring him on. But before I do, I want to do a quick shout out to our podcast sponsor for this evening. Let's put on some jazzy ad music. Ooh. Hello. I'm here to talk to you guys about Cushy Dreams. That's right. You know how, guys, the holidays are here. Everyone's stressed out, anxious, all of the things. Cushy Dreams is here to help. Cushy Dreams is #1 for smokable CBD flower and Delta 8. You know their stuff helps us with sleep, relaxation, feeling good, and more. Cushy Dreams has now come out with gummies, but not just any gummies. Gummies that light up your brain like a Christmas tree and make you feel giggly and warm and fuzzy and awesome inside. Yes, they did it. Cushy Dreams now has Delta 9 THC gummies. Yes, Delta 9 THC. It's the real deal OG THC. It ships legally to you. Each gummy contains 10 milligrams of THC, and they come in 4 euphoric flavors: strawberry, sour watermelon, green apple, and tangerine. I just got these bad boys today, the watermelon and the green apple. I can't wait to try them because I have the other flavors. But this completes my set. All CBD products are buy one, get one free. No promo code needed. That's fresh CBD hemp flower and all sorts of pre-rolled joints, which I really love the quality on these things. These CBD joints come in different blends, like hustle, relax, create, dream. So whatever you want to do with your day or your evening, Cushy Dreams has you covered. Also, we have new sampler bundles. Ooh, enjoy variety with edibles, CBD flower, and pre-rolls. These are also 60% off. Wow, so they're just throwing these deals at us. Also, new limited edition artist series, Delta 9 gummies. That's what these are. Or Delta 8 pre-rolls that feature collectible Mylar bags with art from Gutter Cat Gang NFT collection. Oh my God, so if you're an NFT nerd, get on this. Go to cushydreams.com. That's KUSHY dreams.com. At the checkout, use promo CMP to get 20% off your whole order. Good on the first, second order, etc. Get your gummies with promo code CMP and get your 20% off today. Get your supply so you can get through this holiday season cool, calm, and collected. Ooh, baby. Get that Cushy Dreams. All right. Guys, I got some stand-up dates coming up to close out the year. I can't believe 2022 is coming to a close. I feel like it just got here. Not in my calendar yet is Gino's birthday party show. I'll be at Stand Up New York December 29th. That's Thursday, December 29th at Stand Up New York for Gino Bisconti's birthday show. Then I'm doing a bunch more spots in New York City at the Grizzly Pear. They've opened a new Midtown location. So actually December 28th, I'm doing the 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock shows at the Grizzly Pear Midtown. And then on the 29th, I'm doing Gino's birthday show at Stand Up New York. Then I know that I will be back at the Grizzly Player probably like early January 18th. I'll be there. I'll post these soon. And then first weekend of February 3rd and 4th is DabbleCon. We will be the fans of Stuttering John will be getting together in beautiful Rochester, New York at the beginning of February to celebrate DabbleCon. Comedians of the Dabbleverse. That's a stand-up show, live podcast tapings, a meet and greet, and the Dabby Awards. Get your tickets now. All these events will be held at Comedy at the Carlson in Rochester, New York. Then I'm doing a weekend in San Diego at the end of February, the 24th and 25th at Mic Drop Comedy Club. For tickets, go to my website, ChrissieMayr.com. I'm posting new shows here all the time. And if you live somewhere where I haven't performed yet, get on Twitter, tag the venues that you want me to perform at, tag me. These club owners do notice that kind of thing. So feel free to harass them on my behalf, but in a kind way. Just a gentle nudge. A gentle nudge is what we would like. Speaking of gentle, this guest is not gentle. He is the epitome of just raw masculinity. We worked together a month or so ago out in Long Island at McGuire's. It was an awesome show. He's such a funny guy. He's a comedian and former FBI agent, which is why I'm so excited to have him on today with all the news that's going on. Check out his podcast called Vinny's Proof of Work podcast. Welcome to the show, Vinny D'Agostino. Hello.
Hey, welcome. Thank you. You are the hardest working podcaster in history. My goodness.
Oh, shucks. I could always be working harder.
I'm not sure. I looked it up before we started this, and you have like 47 different shows that you run.
47. Yes, I called it back from 50. So I was like, you know what? Yeah, because there's this one, Wet Spot, Simpcast, and then I'm on FNT, which is someone else's show. And then I do a morning show. But I feel like my morning show and Simpcast and this is all the same umbrella of just non-compound media stuff. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is I have a hard time taking a compliment. So that's
I got you. It's a lot. Like I was looking it over with Julie before, and like the number of hours it seems like you spend on the air per day it's a lot. Some of these shows are like 4 hours, 5-hour recordings. I'm like, no. And she's like, yeah.
At first, I really couldn't do that, but in my mind, I kind of want it to replace the hours that I would normally have spent at a day job, because I'm trying not to go back to one. So I'm just trying to.
That's exactly what I said to Julie. I think that's the good way to look at it. Is like as long as you're doing things during that time period or more, it kind of makes up for that. When did you leave your day job? What was your day job?
Here's the thing: is I should talk about it already, but I just didn't know if I should do it in the form of like a pre-recorded video or something and have edits, because it's a juicy story. I used to work for a huge media company and they fired me because I wouldn't get the vaccine. And it was a job that I already didn't feel appreciated at. I was there 6 years, never got a raise. But the whole time I was like, I'm in media. I should be grateful for, just having a job. So yeah, and I do have proof that my being fired was also politically motivated, because my boss got very upset when he discovered that I was at January 6th, and he got even more upset that I took the days off and he signed off on it. Like he was annoyed that he could just be like, let's get her. She said she was working remote, but she was at January. It's like, no, I took those days off. He signed off on it. So, I was working for one of these kind of like typical elitist, leftist millionaire types. So as you can see, how someone such as myself would be kind of like butting heads with someone like that. But the thing is, like, I got that job 6 years ago, and then over that 6 years, got sort of red pilled, more sort of politically activated. Freedom of speech became very obviously under attack. So I'm inclined to, kind of. Just became more active and more opinionated on these topics, and none of that really fits in with being an executive assistant who's supposed to just shut up and schedule your doctor's appointments.
Well, it's weird how like you don't notice those things until they're like taken away or infringed upon, and then you start to become more interested in whatever it may be, First Amendment, Second Amendment. Like I know people that are only into guns just because people told them you shouldn't have one, and now they're like, borderline gun nuts because that prompted them to be like, maybe I should be more interested in this if you're telling me I should have it and I'm legally allowed to.
I do feel like I constantly feel like I should have more guns. Like, why not?
Well, it doesn't have to be that, but you're talking about when you're at a job where you feel like you can't express yourself in one way, especially if you're not someone who was hyper political before this, and then you start to feel that, like, well, maybe I should care more because everyone else around me is basically trying to get me to be a certain way, and it pushes you sometimes the other direction to say, well, now you're actually getting me pissed off.
I was very politically apathetic for really most of my life until like 2018. And then I was like, wow, this thing I'm trying to make my full-time thing, stand up, seems to be really in danger. And freedom of speech seems to be in danger. And there's crazy censorship going on. And I'm also at the same time, as you know, you're a comedian, I'm also noticing, wow, the people who seem to be of one mind politically seem to have a real advantage, where if you whisper that you're not on that side, people want nothing to do with you. So but I'm so happy you're here today because first of all, I want to get into a little bit of your backstory. So you were formerly an FBI agent. Did you grow up wanting to be that? Did you kind of in the back of your mind always want to be a comedian? Were you pursuing both at the same time?
No, I think the comedian thing was something that I was interested in when I was younger more, but I don't know about you. It was something that I don't have, entertainment or entertainers in my family. So when it was really said disparagingly and pejoratively, when a teacher would say, go be a comedian, that was never a compliment. Like that meant you were fucking up in class. And I was a fuck up in school. So I was constantly getting in trouble. And that was something that was being told to me, not in a positive way. And so the idea of doing it was almost like it was shamed by the fact that they were using it in that sense, people saying that.
Almost like, go waste your life on something that you will never make any money. Like, go do this thing that no one takes seriously.
It's the same exact thing as the go be a garbage man, which in New York, by the way, they do very, very well. In Long Island, they do very well. Right, literally. And but in school, when they'd say, well, if you want to don't do this, you could go be a garbage man. Well, it has an impact on people because that becomes sort of like the lowest rung of what you can do. And I think it's changed drastically now because comics are some of the most influential people. And I'm not, obviously I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so we had big time comics, but people like, Eddie Murphy were not influencing really public discourse in the way that comics do. Right. The number one listened to podcast on the planet is by a comic, and so that's changed dramatically. But back then it was more of like the idea of going to my parents, and I'm first generation. So they came here from Italy when they were like 17. I couldn't imagine having that conversation and being like, so hear me out. I want to tell jokes, as like my career. My mom's heart would break. She'd get back on the boat and go back to Italy. So that was something that was always in the back of my mind. And then the FBI thing started to really become an option or a thought for me, probably early high school. And I remember reading Joe Pistone's book, Donnie Brasco. And I think that kind of really pushed me over the edge and really learning about Italian organized crime, because people always assumed my family was in it because we were first generation, but it couldn't have been more of the opposite, right? My parents were just hardworking and made tons of sacrifices and moved and left Brooklyn for Long Island to get away from that shit. So I fell in love with it. I was like, this is so amazing. This is attaches to my culture. It's something I can investigate on a very high level at the FBI. You have Donnie Brasco movie coming out probably when I was in high school. I must have read the book 3 or 4 times. And so I really started thinking about that. And then by the time I got to college, in learning about the best ways to get in the FBI, becoming a lawyer was definitely one of them. And so I focused on becoming a lawyer because that was much more of an attainable goal in my mind, because it was so difficult to get into the FBI. And then luckily, after I practiced for a few years, I was able to get a class at the FBI in 2004. And then I left the practice of law and did the FBI thing. So it was a lot of long shots that you were kind of building up this stuff to say, well, if this doesn't work, that'll work. If this doesn't work, kind of like comics do, right? Podcasts and stand up and acting and writing and all these different irons in the fire, because you're hoping that one of them, will come through. And I was lucky that some of the more important ones for me came through. And so I was in the FBI from I don't know, 2004 to 2015 when I left.
Wow, that's a lot of years logged in there. Oh my gosh. So that's neat that like as an Italian, you're like you get all these kind of stereotypes and jokes thrown at you, like, oh, you're in the mob. Because the mob is interesting, and like some would argue New York City ran better under mob rule than they do now. And some could also argue that our current government runs under mob rule. They just don't call it that.
Yep.
So you're there. So what was your, I guess, as far as you can say, like your job at the FBI?
So I started, when you first get there, you do a rotation in New York. New York's the biggest office of the FBI. So it's very different in how it operates as compared to someone working in like an Indian reservation. I was just talking to a former agent who worked in an Indian reservation in New Mexico. Totally different. Like I could sit with that person, and other than the bureaucracy part of the bureau, our jobs are completely different. And in New York, you do a rotation. So they start you out working like the ops center, which is where you work, where all the crazies come in and call the FBI, and they, tinfoil hat people. And then you do like 2-3 weeks there. Then you do a rotation of special operations, which is their surveillance group. So you follow people around. And then while you're doing this rotation, you could volunteer for other squads. And if you're lucky, you can start volunteering for a squad that hopefully could pull you over when you're done with your rotation, kind of like a draft. So I just volunteered a ton for all the organized crime squads. There was 5 organized crime squads in the FBI in New York, 1 for each family. I don't think that exists anymore. I think they
really. So this is like, what year is this? Where
2004. I graduated in January 2005. So 2005.
So you went right into the FBI after you graduated, and like people are still talking about the 5 families in 2005. Oh
yeah, I mean it's one of those things that's so enduring because it's passed down generationally in the family. So imagine growing up and your father is in the Colombo family or the Gambino family, and from the time that you're born to the time you get older, this is the life that you get to witness, and the odds of you then being drawn into that are very, very high, as opposed to like if your dad worked at like Xerox, you might work at Xerox, you might not work at Xerox. But organized crime is 24/7 job for mobsters. So it's something that it was not as it's not like it was in its heyday in 2004. But I mean, we arrested over 200 indictments. We had 9 trials while I was there. We had like 5 body recoveries. We basically destroyed the Colombo family while I was there. So it was very, very active. We had a lot of phenomenal sources. That we ran. So yeah, it was an awesome time to be there.
Which families are still going?
All 5 of them are still there.
All of them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, they're still doing stuff. Who knew?
The FBI.
Okay, yeah. I guess
they knew.
That's your job.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
The chat is curious to know if you ever worked with a Mr. Jim Baker, who was in the news. He was a former general counsel for the FBI and then got a job in deputy general counsel at Twitter. And he was just let go from Twitter. And it's pretty hot news because basically it's now been proven that the FBI was involved in censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story way back from October of 2020. Basically, it's come out that the FBI had been meeting with Facebook, with Twitter. They knew this laptop was real. They had the laptop for like a year, but would tell this, social media, hey, just be on the lookout for Russian disinformation. So I just didn't know, like, if we can go over it, we can like read through an article if you are not super like up to date on it, because a lot of this just came out today.
Yeah, I saw some of it today, and a lot of what you just said there, actually, there's a lot to unpack with what you just said. So, like in terms of going back to the proof that the FBI was colluding or working with Twitter, it really depends on how you view those comments. From my understanding, again, I'm not an expert on this. I don't follow this like some people do, where they read every single thing that comes out. I kind of just layer in the things I read with my experience, and then fill in the gaps with like, more likely than not, probability wise, what was actually going on here based on my experience there. And I think that's one thing that happens a lot is people can read the news and things that actually have a logical explanation sound really, really bad. Some of the things that sound really bad are really, really bad. And I think over the last, since I left in 2015, that's probably more true than not, because I've noticed that a lot of things happening just coincidentally since I left seem to be are really bad when I really even unpack them. So from what I remember and reading over the past couple of years, the allegation is that the way this happened was that somebody from the FBI went to Twitter and essentially said, and Facebook, and said, keep an eye out for Russian disinformation and also like information related to hacked or stolen data. And it was left kind of vague like that. And then when the laptop story happened, the Twitter people connected the dots and said, well, this must be what the FBI was warning us about. The problem with all of this, of course, is that it very conveniently allows you to censor an incredibly important story and an incredibly pivotal moment in the election cycle. Whereas, again, devil's advocate, had this happen in reverse and this information was inculpatory or made Eric Trump or Don Jr. Trump.
That's a great word, inculpatory.
Yeah, so making you look guilty, right? Had this made Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump look bad, do you think someone at Twitter would have said, we've been warned about Russian disinformation. We probably should not run with this story, right? If it was Eric Trump's laptop, Don Jr.'s laptop, they would have said, hey, this is newsworthy. And we did some due diligence, and it might be hack information. It might be Russian disinformation, but it also might not be. And that's the problem with everything that's been happening, in my opinion, over the last how many years is every single thing is interpreted through the lens of how can this hurt the people we don't like and help the people we like. And then suddenly, miraculously, all the pieces fall into play and you go, well, we don't have to run with this story. So that's the first part is the FBI's involvement. There's a broader discussion that needs to happen. And, when I left the first 8 years when I was at the Bureau, and then I went over to cyber. That was the last 3 years that I was at the FBI. And I worked non-state sponsored criminal intrusions, which is basically all the hacks that happened that were not state sponsored, not Russia, not Korea, all the fun hacks. So like the Home Depot stuff and the JP Morgans and the Silk Road. Yeah, like when these companies get hacked and they steal all this information, and then you get like you get notices in the mail saying like, oh, your information was taken from Home Depot. We're going to give you credit monitoring. Like whatever, ignore that. If you don't remember the story, it's not that important. But the point is that the difference between working something like organized crime at the FBI and working cyber at the FBI is that it was an eye opener for me, because while the organized crime side, we were very insulated. We didn't speak with private companies like ever. There was no reason to. Like we would go serve subpoenas, execute search warrants, make arrests. But even if we were serving a search warrant, for example, in like a funeral parlor related to like a case we're working, or a garage where we believe somebody was buried in the back, what we shared with those companies was very, very limited, because they didn't really have anything we needed other than we had the legal authority to be there and do what we needed to do, and they just had to get out of the way. What's very different about cyber is that these companies, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, are actually sitting on like ridiculous amounts of data that the FBI doesn't have and probably never will have directly. It's just not something they can do. And this is the first time ever in history that we have a situation like this, where you have private companies that are actually in possession of data regarding people, civilians, citizens, that makes the FBI databases look like a fucking Excel spreadsheet. Looks like garbage compared to it. So what does that mean? That means that when the FBI is working a case, when I'm on in the cyber division at the FBI, and I need to get a search warrant over to Google, that means that depending on how they interpret that search warrant will depend on the quality of the information I receive in return. And so what was shocking to me when I first got there was that you're sharing a lot more with the private sector than I had ever shared with the private sector ever before in all my years there, my previous 8 years or whatever it was. I remember getting off of one phone call with one of the major tech companies in the world, And I was still new to the squad, so I was just shutting up and listening during a lot of these phone calls and letting some of the senior cyber agents at that time take the lead. And I remember getting off the phone call and I was kind of looking at my notes and kind of quiet. And the agent's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Should we be telling them, all of this that we're telling them?" But we were revealing some really intimate details about our investigation. And he's like, "If we don't, we're not going to get what we need in return from them." And I was like, damn, man, that's pretty crazy to think about that kind of partnership with private sector. There's nothing wrong with it if everyone respects the boundaries. My boundaries typically that, when you're talking about the type of work that we were doing, you're talking about constitutional boundaries. But what happens when the people on the phone on the bureau side lean very hard in one direction and the people on the phone on the Twitter side lean very hard in the same direction? And they also believe that they're saving the world. What happens then in terms of protections that should be in place for the user accounts that they're looking into now? Logically speaking, common sense wise, what would you think would happen? Would there be underproduction for things like search warrants, or would there be a tendency for maybe like overproduction, giving too much information because you believe you're doing the right thing? So that's where I think the wheel started to fall off the bus. Does that make sense?
Thank God that you're still vamping. That's what makes you a true professional, Vinny.
I lost you there.
My internet cuts out for the first time in a really long time when I'm talking about FBI. Not stuff that
Coincidence?
You're
about to get swatted.
Oh my God. It's not even funny anymore. It's funny when it happens to you and then you're like, oh wow, this actually really sucks.
Yeah.
Okay, so shit. Where were we?
Okay, so I'll fill in the blanks.
Okay.
On what I just said. So the differences between working in something like traditional violation, like organized crime or gangs or something like that, and working in cyber. And this goes back to your question about the FBI, supposed FBI involvement in Twitter and other companies. The problem is that for the first time ever in history, the FBI needs these companies more than these companies actually need the FBI. There's definitely a need back and forth, but these companies are sitting on vast amounts of data that the FBI will never, ever be able to get themselves. I know people like to talk about like, hey, you're at the FBI. Did you see my file? I'm like, A, you're a fucking loser. Nobody cares. B, no, these companies, and we all know them, are actually sitting on way more information about you and your life. These companies know where you are 24/7. The FBI doesn't know where you are 24/7. Google knows where I am right now. Google knows when I'm with you. Google knows when I'm traveling. Google knows what apps I'm using. Google knows when I'm asleep. Google knows when I'm awake. He knows when I'm being naughty.
Google is actually Santa.
Yeah, Google could be the ultimate Santa Claus. FBI doesn't know that. And for the FBI to get that information, because they're a government agency, they have to go through the U.S. Constitution. They have to do it constitutionally and get search warrants and have probable cause. Google just needs you to click a checkbox on a end user agreement, a EULA, right? That's all they need you to do. And you're going to click it because you really want that app and you really like having their shit on your phone. So for the first time ever, you have government agencies leaning on private sector. And instead of saying, hey, we do our investigations, we always used to say at the government, the information exchange goes one way. It's a one-way street, meaning when we go talk to somebody, they provide us information. We provide very little in return. It has to be that way. That's the way it was designed, to protect everyone's rights. This reliance on the private sector, this reliance on these tech companies has perverted that relationship, because if you don't help these companies, they're not going to help you. And people say, well, if you give them a search warrant, they have to comply. Well, a search warrant, the language in a search warrant could be interpreted in very different ways. So if the search warrant says all documents related to A, B, and C, somebody there who doesn't want to help you can interpret those in a very strict way and give you a very limited amount of documents, the return. If they really want to help you, they're going to overproduce. And in some cases, they're actually going to call you on the phone on the side and say, change this word to that word and resend this to me. And you're going to go, okay. And then you resend the document. Lo and behold, that was the magic word. And now a flood of information comes back to you. Wow. So that's what we're dealing with. That doesn't, what it's not good. Don't get me wrong, but it's also something that everybody's dealing with for the first time ever on this level. And so when you have the FBI going to give the heads up to Twitter, it's because they're trying to do the right thing. But if all the people are aligned politically in one direction, it's going to be interpreted in such a way that that it's going to the outcome of is going to be very inevitable. It's going to disproportionately impact one group of people and disproportionately benefit the other group of people, because everybody is so in line with what they believe is right and what they believe is wrong. And everyone's going to lose sight of them, what they're supposed to be doing. So number one, what you said about the warning, that's my understanding of what happened, was that they gave them a heads up, and Twitter took a very liberal interpretation of that and said, it must be the laptop. Do I think that's bullshit? Yeah, honestly, probably. I mean, I don't know what the intentions of the FBI were. I don't know if they're even being honest about that conversation, but that's what was, I believe somebody testified to that, that was the extent of the warning. And Twitter said, okay, well, then it must be this Hunter Biden thing, which, by the way, to your point, some basic due diligence would have demonstrated that this laptop was legitimate. It was simple to figure that out. Simple.
Okay. So it looks like I'm trying to figure out, because a couple people in the chat were like, oh, what does Vinny think of Jim Baker? Did you guys work together at the FBI at the same time? I think he was in office at the FBI general counsel from 2014 to 2017. So you guys must have just passed each other.
There's a lot of bad stuff that happened right around the time I left, which I think is terms of the simulation we're all operating. And there's going to be a reason that 2015, there was a reason I left. There was just a lot of, it's such a larger conversation. But no, to answer the question directly, I didn't work with him. I have no idea who he is, but is it surprising to me to hear this? No, because he was part of many other people at very high levels at headquarters at the FBI to be operating under a different mission than everybody else. So it doesn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah, it really is. And I don't know if you were following this journalist, Matt Taibbi, did a huge dump. It's called the Twitter Files. And on Friday released a 37 tweet long thread about just basically the FBI being involved generally in censorship and this laptop story. And I guess it's going to be a multi-part thing. But they found out and I don't know why this didn't occur to them earlier, but I guess Jim Baker, who was still working at Twitter, was the guy to vet and go through all of these Twitter files before they were handed over to the journalists. So it's who knows what he took out? And a lot of people were saying, yeah, that makes sense, because a lot of references to the FBI were taken out or just deleted somehow. So it's not shocking, but it is kind of shocking to just see it written out, to see the proof.
Yeah, and I saw he was. I love Elon's term. He was exited from the building. They canned him. I'm sure we'll see him on CNN in a few weeks with his new gig, but not shocking. And how he didn't know. I mean, look, Elon's been there for a cup of coffee. So I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm sure he's wrapping his mind around and to the extent of it. And so I think they released this information. I love transparency, especially when you're talking about a company like this where we all understand the impact of banning accounts during election cycles, restricting content, banning the post. I mean, this is insane. Suspending the Post's account, blocking and banning people for sharing the article, which then turns out to be a few years later 100% validated, but nothing changed. It was like nothing. It wasn't like there was something attached to the laptop that made it well, how were we supposed to know? It had a Russian flag sticker on it. Of course it was Russian. It wasn't anything like that. It was that nobody bothered to look. And there's ways both forensically to analyze a laptop to determine its authenticity. And also, by the way, the shop owner who was in receipt of it, who can tell you the story about how Hunter or whomever dropped it off and failed to pick it up. And all those pieces will match up. The information in the laptop itself would be forensically very powerful. So, then you find out, well, it turns out it's legit. And then we're told, well, that's old news. Well, that's old news because we weren't allowed to discuss it when it was new news. We weren't allowed to actually talk about it when it was new news. And now that it's old news, you're like, oh, why are we going to waste our time on that? Well, that can't be.
How long do you think it would be? How long do you think it would take the FBI to verify something like a laptop to know, oh, if this is actually Hunter Biden's laptop? Do you think that'd be like a long process?
No, honestly, it's the countless ways somebody could look at a laptop and validate its contents in terms of, was this stuff planted here? Does this stuff belong to the purported owner? Put it this way, it would take you hundreds of hours to put a laptop together and plant information on it that covers even 6 months of someone's life and have it match up forensically. Because there's so many things your operating system, the Windows or your Mac OS, the applications running, and pairing that up with everything that your computer connects to you on the internet. So you're not just fixing a computer. You're not just rigging and planting evidence on a computer. That's easy. You're now going to try to rig evidence on a computer and have it jive with every other company out there that laptop. So when he goes and he syncs with the cloud, you're going to have to go to Apple now and generate log information to match that he was logging in from this IP address, this geolocation, this application, and did A, B, and C activity with a company that the FBI has no control over. And then times that by, I don't know, 1,000 companies that your laptop comes into contact with on like a daily basis while you're not even doing anything. Things are checking in. So it's so the idea that you couldn't look at a laptop and say, let's start with a basic analysis of like the contents of it, photographs, images, movies, and say, okay, do these look like the people that they would belong to? Do these videos and images look altered? Is it like, a crack pipe photoshopped in on, you can do analysis on that to determine the authenticity of just the files themselves and say, okay, well, if this is a legitimate photo of these people, okay, they could have come from a hack and then dumped in this computer, but then you can go investigate that and say, okay, do we have unauthorized access happening on Google Cloud for this person during the time period where these photos existed? And you'd see very easily, no, you don't. So it would start to paint a picture very, very quickly forensically that this was legitimate. And again, like I said, you start with the simple part of it, the gumshoe part of it. Go interview the shop owner, CCTV cameras, maybe receipts. I don't know. This sounds crazy. Interview the person it belongs to and say, did you drop your laptop off at a shop? Oh, you didn't? Were you in wherever this was, Delaware on this date? Oh, no, I wasn't. Well, that's funny because we have ABC information, which shows you were in Delaware on this day. In fact, we show that you were near this location at the time. Does this look like your signature? It does to us. So very easily you can break down that story and determine its authenticity. So this is not a difficult task.
Yeah. It says before joining Twitter, Baker also worked as general counsel at the FBI, key figure in the Bureau investigation into alleged Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Attorney Michael Sussman met with Baker in 2016 and presented purported data and white papers that allegedly demonstrated a covert communications channel between the Trump organization and Alpha Bank, which is based in Russia. Sussman was accused of telling Baker that he was not doing work for any client, but later billing the Hillary Clinton campaign for the work. Sussman was acquitted earlier this year of one count of making a false statement to the FBI. Baker was also personally involved in the FISA warrant application to surveil Carter Page, who was working as an aide to former President Trump on the 2016 campaign. The application relied heavily on the discredited Trump dossier. Baker later admitted that his role in the Page FISA application was unusual. Let's see. Taibbi said Tuesday that he and another. Ooh, now
Wait,
I want.
Pause there for a second.
Now I want a soda. Well, that.
Oh yeah, it's a hard seltzer. So pause there for a second because that's like one of those things that gets glossed over a lot too. So the unusual role, right? Hold on, it's backwards over here, so I have to read it over here. Hold on.
Okay, you want me to scroll back?
Yeah, I think it's right there. So he's saying how he was involved in the Carter FISA warrant in an unusual role. Anyone ever reading articles or hearing things, testimony, let's say, about what people did? This could be trial testimony or testimony up on Capitol Hill. It's very important. One of the things that as an investigator you want to look at is behavior participants of a supposed conspiracy, whether what they were doing was like normal or abnormal. Is it typical for them to be involved in that or not? Because it's a red flag when you have people that are involved in things they wouldn't normally be involved in. Because just like in your normal life, that usually means somebody might not necessarily be doing something wrong, but they're trying to do something that isn't going the way that they want it to. So if somebody's involved at a very specific level on an investigation where they would be 5 levels removed from that, then you have to start looking at why. Why were you getting involved in something that had nothing to do with you and you're trying to help? And then you look at that person's motivations and very easily you'd say, well, how are they politically motivated? And lo and behold, if you find that their political leanings go in the direction of where that ended up going, that's like a super red flag to me. And I think other people should watch out for that. And that's where the bureaucracy breaks down. That's where things that happen at the Bureau break down and bad things happen, because you have all sorts of, regardless of what you're talking about, that happened over the last 10 years at the Bureau, you're going to find tons of people doing things that they wouldn't normally be involved in, because they believe like I said, they were saving America.
Saving democracy. Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's helpful. All right, let's go into this. Taibbi said Tuesday that he and the other journalist, Barry Weiss, were dealing with obstacles to new searches when Weiss discovered that Baker was responsible for releasing the files over the weekend. The news that Baker was reviewing the Twitter files surprised everyone involved, to say the least, Taibbi tweeted. Must have been Musk. Musk tweeted later on Tuesday that Baker's explanation for his involvement was unconvincing. James Comer told Fox and Friends First on Monday that the House Oversight Committee will likely call Baker and other Twitter executives to testify about their handling of the laptop story. Baker and former Twitter executive Vijay Gadde, I can't just not say Vijay, it's Vijaya, whatever, are probably the 2 most high-profile Twitter employees that we want to hear from. Comer said, my advice to them is, prior to coming before the Oversight Committee in January or February, as quick as we can get them in front of the Oversight Committee, is they need to look very hard to try to find evidence as to why they suppressed this story. And it sounds like Vijay really took it upon herself.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is they're trying to cover up for Jack or not, but it seems like Vijay really was the guiding force on making that decision to censor this story. She just seems so obviously politically motivated.
They're saying, and I read last week that whether they're trying to protect him or not, I don't know, but that Jack was not directly involved in a lot of this. I know a lot of people will say I find that hard to believe, but I don't know. For me personally, my opinion is I saw some major changes with Jack just casually over the last couple of years, to the point where there were conversations that he had with Elon and others. And I'm not alone in this. I don't think that got the sense that I think he realized this thing he had created had morphed into something. This was supposed to be a free speech platform. That was one of the underpinnings of this entire experiment. And I think he realized that best intentions aside, it started to go in a very, very different direction. And I think he realized he lost control of it. It took on a life of its own. And again, total speculation, but there's a lot of things happening here that I honestly think secretly he's probably pretty happy about. He's tweeted as much. Well, he's tweeted a few things about releasing information, and he's not like, this is a disgrace and these, this data was private and was done under the best. He's not defending. I haven't seen any tweets in the last year defending the suppression of the laptop story. I haven't seen shit. Maybe if I'm wrong, somebody hit me up on Twitter and show it to me. The other part of that is his interest a few years ago when he finally was orange pilled and started to learn about Bitcoin. Those notions coincide. People who finally take the time to study and understand Bitcoin, are the people that understand free speech, understand transparency. All those things kind of go together. And a lot of what's happening on Twitter is the exact opposite of how Bitcoin operates. I know that's a weird connection, but people that are into Bitcoin will know what I'm talking about. So I don't think he's too upset about what's happening here. Yeah, he's at the African Bitcoin conference, right now. He's focusing all his attention on education related to Bitcoin, and because So
He's
the
eating
reason
rice, taking pictures of guys on horses.
horses,
Living it
yeah,
up.
he could give a
Yeah.
shit about Twitter.
Uh-huh.
The amazing thing about what they're trying to create, one of the ideas, uh, wouldn't this be wonderful? Let me throw this idea out to you. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you're like me, in this sense, I think you are, is that all we want is like to know the rules when it comes to Twitter, and then we want equal application of the rules. It's that simple, right? I don't want to suppress someone who disagrees with me. I don't want to suppress. I don't want to punish somebody unnecessarily. I just want the rules to be transparent and know that when person A breaks them or person B breaks them, they're enforced equally. And in terms of duration and severity and things like that. And what we have with Twitter now is we don't have that. We have rules for thee and rules for me, and people that lean right have to tippy toe around the rules because any one mistake could get you banished. And for someone like you know, that is a major problem, to lose the ability to communicate, right? It's a career, could be a career altering, potentially career ending. So one of the things about Bitcoin that the conversation that he had with Elon was, you know, like, wouldn't it be wild if one day we can create a social media platform that has rules, and then the rules are forced, not by a human, but by a program that doesn't give a shit about your political persuasion.
This is where Elon
right?
comes in.
Right. And so that's what Bitcoin does with money, right? Bitcoin does that with money, where the rules, it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. When you own Bitcoin, your Bitcoin is just as protected and just as unseizable as Obama's Bitcoin is. And when I send the Bitcoin transaction, the Bitcoin network doesn't go, let's see what Vinny's social media footprint is. Let's see who he knows and which way he leans. Well, we're going to prioritize Vinny's transaction over Chrissie Mayr's transaction because she leans right and he leans left. And that's where we need to
shut down
get
your bank account because they don't know.
Shut down your bank account. Exactly. And so I think all that stuff with him getting orange pilled with that is kind of come full circle. And I do think one day we're going to get to the point. It's difficult because we're talking about content, but one day we're going to get to the point where we're going to have these social media platforms, which shouldn't be operated by humans, because let's face it, if people who leaned hardcore right were running Twitter, we would be in the exact situation in reverse. I have no doubt that if everyone flocked to, if the original founder of Twitter was Bob Dole, and everyone flooded to Twitter back whenever, and it became this right leaning corporation, that we'd probably be seeing the same type of censorship happening in the other direction. Because when you get enough people together that think the same way, it's just a matter of time till everyone's like, why don't we limit that? Well, why don't we just do a little bit further?
Corruption on both sides. Yeah. And of course, it's human nature to, like, I want to make my enemies look bad. I want to, like, highlight their mistakes. God, it just sucks. It just feels like it's tipped so much in one way that we just want it to be level and in the middle again. And it just feels like the left gets away with so much more bullshit and, like, censorship and, like,
no, there's no denying that,
like, steering culture and in a powerful, scary way that in the right wing is not even touching.
No, I don't even know how people can. I have sometimes people tell me, in their opinion, oh, I think it's the opposite. I'm like, look, one of us is fucking insane, because there's no way you could tell me that the leaders of all these companies, the ethos at all these companies, leans hardcore. What was they were just saying at Twitter was like 99% of people were
they
Democrat.
showed in the Twitter files how much money they donated to the Democratic Party versus they gave like $15 to the
it was like fucking
hilarious
$15 and a half a sandwich. They're like, here, take this, or we're throwing it out. You can't seriously tell people that any company that is leaning in that direction it's not gonna impact how they behave. And now going back to the FBI, when I was there, given I wasn't in headquarters for this reason, but it was not a very political job. Like, I never really got into politics with any of the other agents. I knew there were some agents that leaned left. There were definitely some agents that leaned right, but it really had like zero impact on our investigations. But going back to much larger problems at the Bureau in terms of how they incentivize executive roles and basically moving people up into important positions that never actually worked cases, people that couldn't do the job, but were very intent on just becoming getting promoted as quickly as they could. Well, then these people end up in these positions, and then it becomes politically charged because that's something maybe they're more comfortable with, and that becomes then something like everything else. Now you're drawing in other people to executive roles that feel the same way you do. The whole Peter Strzok thing. Peter Strzok, he wasn't a criminal agent. He never worked a criminal investigation, as far as I know, but he was put in a situation where he was involved in a criminal investigation. And then, not surprisingly to any real criminal agent who did criminal work, it was a complete disaster. It'd be like somebody trying to, I play drums. Well, how hard could the trombone be? You're like, they're very different instruments. So I know they're instruments, but they're very different instruments.
Especially if it's rusty.
So you have the what?
Especially if it's rusty.
Yes, especially if it's rusty, then you got to really grease it. But yeah, that's what you have you have that happening. And again, if everybody at the top third of the FBI leans in a direction, how could you not expect that to impact the investigations and the mission of the Bureau? And the citizens, this is what's most disappointing about America to me, is that there was a time when people understood that we would rather it be fair and level, and it's going to hurt sometimes for the things I believe in, but I know it's going to hurt sometimes for the things you believe in, but everybody's kept in check, and everyone agrees that that's the way it should be. And now what we've gone to is no, because they've demonized one side so viciously that nobody wants the balance. In headquarters, if I said, wouldn't it be great if we just figured out either hiring and moving people that are incredibly apolitical, like they don't even know who's the president, or we get a mix of people that are like this leaning and that leaning and this leaning, and then they all get in a room, and when someone says we should go up on a FISA on Donald Trump's aid, someone's like, all right, what's the basis of that? And then they hash it out and they go, seems to me like we have nothing. Seems to me like we're going to look like fools, and the Bureau is going to be embarrassed when this eventually comes out, because it always does. And then other people go, well, fuck you, but okay, we'll just not do it. And if you're, on the other hand, if you have the proof, if you have the ability to say, no, this is something that would be worthwhile, then somebody is challenging you within your job to make you go through that process with them before everyone jumps on the bandwagon. And then 5 years later, Comey's testifying about all these screw ups. And you're like, how could this happen? Well, nobody was challenged. We've all been in rooms like that. We've all been in rooms where like the mob mentality takes over, and you're like, but, and you're like, oh my God, is no one going to consider, and that's one thing that happens. And you work at, Sparrows, and you're working and you're fighting with someone in the kitchen over pizza. All right, maybe you're serving too many pepperoni pies because you failed the ability to argue and debate. It's another thing when you're at the FBI and nobody's debating these issues, and it makes the American public lose confidence in what was the premier law enforcement agency in the fucking world, and now it becomes a laughing stock because of it. And so that's the problem with that, is like people have turned debate into like a bad thing. Like if you argue the other point, it must be because you're a Russian asset. It must be because you're anti-American. It must be because you're sexist, phobic, whatever. And half the time when I argue a point on Twitter, I don't even agree with what the fuck I'm saying. I'm just making the person say to justify their belief. I don't even agree with what I'm saying. I'm just saying why. And they're like, oh, fuck you, you Russian asset. And I'm like, I'm actually agree with you, but I'm just asking you to explain your point, because you going in saying, this, and this person's this and that, and then me saying explain it, and you go, that's a problem. Like you should have an opinion that you're not able to articulate. And 9 out of 10 interactions on Twitter are with people that have very strong convictions and zero ability to defend the point. And then they assume I disagree with them. I'm like, I actually agree with you, but it's embarrassing because you have no reason to believe what you believe. You're just a fucking idiot like the other person who believes the opposite.
It's like going to the gym. Like you got to keep explaining your beliefs and learning more, and be okay to adjust, and be able to to basically debate your point and show your work, show people why you think
show your work. Exactly. Show your work. And also flip what I like to do is whenever something comes up and I say in my mind, okay, this was right or this was wrong, then I just flip the facts in my mind and say, okay, let's say this was now impacting somebody I did like or somebody I don't like. Would my outcome be different? And if I'm like, yeah, it might, I know there's a problem in my thought process. Somewhere in there, my bias is coming in that because this was made this politician who I like look bad, now I'm looking for a reason to invalidate the claim. Whereas if it was about someone I hated, I'd be like, yeah, like the whole Pelosi thing and the attack in the House, a great example of that, right? Like so much smoke and stuff. And I did a podcast on my show where I broke it down. And my conclusion was that, yeah, it's weird, but honestly, a lot of the things that that I was, as I dug into it, made me believe that this is probably more legitimate than not. And the body cameras that the cops are wearing when they show up are going to prove this positively, 100%, one way or the other, whether or not he led the cops in, whether he walked them in, whether he ran out. So now if they don't release that, footage, I don't care if it's blurred out and, of course, they could say, well, we want to protect, that's fine. But that needs to be made available so the public can say, you see, you conspiracy theory idiots, you were wrong. And then we go, okay, yeah, we jump to conclusions on that. But that's a good example of one that everyone's jumping on, that it's like, yeah, there's some smoke there, but it's going to be a tall order to sell this story when all the cops are wearing body cam videos and were there. And these interviews with the suspect were done at the police station, which was recorded. Right. Now, does the footage get Epstein and suddenly disappears? Yeah, then it's going to start to piss me off when they're like, "Oh, we recorded over."
What's the point of putting cameras on everybody?
Right,
and
exactly.
I just the whole time you're talking about this Pelosi thing, I'm imagining like this image of like the FBI. They're like getting details and like crime scenes. Like, I love that. Like, I really want a spiked seltzer now. I wasn't going to drink, but like, I hear that noise. I'm like, and they're just doing like a little crime scene investigation. It's like, oh, it appears like the guy's cum is right around your lip there, sir.
We're going to take a swab of the corner of your mouth. It looks to be some dried semen. I could explain that. That's not his, actually. That's not his. Dang. I mean, that's the good thing about, and going back to the laptop thing, that's the good and bad thing about it is like, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of this stuff would be like, who knows? Everything's recorded now. Everything is whether it's actual video or digitally on the devices we use. So when people make up lies and stories, it's a lot harder now to cover that up than it was 20, 30 years ago, where you could be like, I drove from here to there, and people are like, I don't know. We have no way of proving one way or the other. Now, like I said, imagine if I told you drive from where you live now, drive to my house and back, and evade all collection of information about that trip. I want it to be like, you could say you were in bed and I want the cops to have no way. How would you do that? It's really difficult.
Could you take your car in to have them turn back the mileage? Could you?
What about cameras at tolls? What about, what about the computer in your car that's collecting the information? So you could,
I mean my car is really old, so that would not.
Yeah, if you have a real shit box, maybe, but your phone, of course. Well, why was your phone off? Right. That's the other thing. People commit murders and like, when it happened because their phone was off for the only 2 hours in 2 years. Their phone was off.
Like, look, I'm trying to take a break. Okay, I'm trying to take a social media break. I'm taking a Twitter break. Right. Okay, I'm turning.
Right after I said I'll kill you, and then my phone went off for 2 hours. That was merely a coincidence. So it's almost like the absence of this digital information is so inculpatory, right? It makes you look so bad that now you can't even say, well, I shut my cell phone off, right? Mobsters used to do that all the time. Now they don't carry smartphones and shit, but now for someone to say I shut my electronics off, that right there that's the time I want to look at. When were you black? When were you completely off the grid electronically? Because I know you were doing something really fucking bad during that 2 hour period.
Some people shut their phones off when they go to bed, but obviously you probably could find a history of that in somebody's record.
Yeah, you have to build a pattern.
Yeah.
Right. I have this bit I've been working on that I'll be brave enough at some point to say it on stage, but it's basically advice on how to kill your spouse. And there are things like that you have to consider beforehand, and building up a history of, going out for a walk at 2 a.m. is something you have to do long before the day the person goes missing. Scott Peterson was like, yeah, we went out on Christmas Eve to go on a boat ride. They're like, have you ever done that before? He's like, no. Like, yeah, no shit, because that's when you dumped her, her body overboard. But had he been committed to it, he could have actually set that up like 3 Christmas Eves in a row. It's a commitment. Wow. But then on the 4th, when he kicks her overboard.
That's so interesting. Do you think anything will come from this? Like, do you think the Democrats are truly going to answer for what for all this bullshit. It's just so funny. Just putting an FBI in the Twitter search just brings up a lot of shit. And this is a good point too from Tim Dillon's show. Yoel Roth, who is Twitter's chief censor, admitted that he met weekly for years with DHS, FBI, other security state agents to get censorship orders. In this second clip, Tim insightfully and hilariously explains why their elite complex makes them believe censorship is their
evil people
duty.
by nature. I think they are kind of drunk on their own power a little bit. And I think they have it's like a mom complex. Have you ever met a real mom who's like, I used to have an Aunt named Michelle who was like a mom. She was like, what's going on? Like she had that energy. You know what I mean? Like a mom who's like with a shirt that says it's wine o'clock. And you know what I mean? And she's like a martyr. And she's like, if you knew half of what I had to deal with, you know how many Nazis I deal with on a daily basis. And it's a mom energy. It's like a drunk wine mom who's had enough of her shit kids. And she comes in the house and she's like, fucking Christ, you'll eat when I say you eat. And you'll watch the things I say you can watch because I'm a mom. And you can understand it because that's a mother. But these people are a little drunk on their power. They have a little bit of a mom energy. They're like, there's a lot of kids and teenagers and trolls and Nazis and Russians and Chinese, and everybody's yelling at each other on these sites. And nobody really wants to admit that these sites are just kind of bad, right? I mean, that would be the real but we can't admit that. There goes all the money. Because we can't admit that these things are easily gamed. They make us less human. The eventual thing is that they destroy our humanity entirely. But between now and then, there's a lot of there's a lot of ad revenue. So people have to go. It's almost like, it's almost like going to a crackhead and going, can't you just smoke a little bit? I mean, you're embarrassing yourself. You're sitting on the street. Can you smoke a little bit at the end of the day after work? And it's like, no, they're on crack. So what happens with these sites is it is kind of funny to watch people debate how to make them really, really great when a lot of the problems seem like they were present at the design of these things. And it feels like these things are kind of working exactly how they're supposed to work. So Elon Musk, so every week or whatever, during the election time, the FBI would sit down with Twitter and go, get ready for it. It's coming.
Oh, God. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he's right. And so the weekly meeting thing, this is I think you got disconnected when I was talking about this, but when I went from organized crime to cyber, this is the difference, is that the sharing of information, instead of it being this one-way street that it was forever with the FBI up to that point in history, and now that you have these companies that have what you want, it becomes a two-way street. So the FBI, DHS, is sharing information with these companies to add value to the relationship. And then these companies are then sharing information back with them. Sometimes, hopefully most of the time officially, but of course, human nature being what it is, a lot of it's going to happen unofficially. And what happens when the person going to Twitter really does, they read something at the FBI, some information out of a field office, and they're reading this information and they really truly believe it's accurate, and it's saying, hey, there's going to be a disinformation campaign. They might not have the ability to vet that. That's just something that part of their weekly duties is to go to Twitter and pass that information along, because some dipshit in headquarters tasked the field agent to go collect something, twisted it in a way that got what he wanted. And now that person's being used as a pawn to go to the Twitter and say, we have information, there might be something. Maybe they said it might even be a laptop. Wink, wink. Don't put that in your briefing, but that it might even be a laptop, right? And so all these people are that echo chamber that gets created within these organizations. It's not meant, the interaction between government agencies and technology companies is the first time we've ever had to deal with this, and we're like in our baby steps phase with it. And obviously we're not dealing with it very, very well, because it's becoming too simpatico. Like there should be a separation between these companies and the government. And historically, companies wanted to keep that separation because it was bad for business to have people believe that you were in bed with DOJ. And I got that all the time. And I was okay with that because I understood it. But when it becomes like, no, the FBI becomes activists and the companies are becoming activists and the people that like these people in these companies are activists, you lose sight of everything. The Constitution goes out the window. Then it becomes about saving the world and the rules of the game, which say we shouldn't get this information without probable cause, without a search warrant, and it should be limited to that. And there should be no side phone calls and there should be no favors either way. Go out the fucking window because everybody's on the same team now. And our whole system's designed to be adversarial. People should be adversarial in a respectful way so that everyone's being held checked in place. And so what he's saying about the mom and going there and yeah, to some extent that's true because they're going there and they're trying to say, this is our value to the relationship. These are the things you need to censor because it's from Russia. And the company wants, the company doesn't want to piss DOJ off, right? They don't want DOJ crawling up their ass because it's been threatened. Anytime Twitter did anything in the past historically or Facebook, what happened? Oh, we might just have to spin up a congressional investigation. Fucking Elon went from hero to now the administration saying we're keeping a close eye on it. What a fucking tacit threat that is.
Yeah, he's afraid of getting assassinated. Like
right. Our own government has
Yeah.
decided because he is doing something they don't like, completely legal, that Biden and everyone's like, well, we should really look into his involvement.
Yes.
And that should freak everybody out.
Him.
Everybody should be like, wait a minute, this guy was the golden boy 18 months ago. Do we really want our administrations deciding on the minute that the private individuals do something they don't like, they can turn an investigation on them and ruin them and destroy them? Like, forget if you hate Elon. What if it's somebody you love tomorrow? And this is the problem with America now is people don't look at it that way. And then when it happens to them, it went from build your own platform. And 2 weeks later, it went from we need government intervention. This is ridiculous. We can't have private individuals deciding what free speech. That's what we were fucking saying for fucking ever. Right? We were screaming that from the mountaintops. Like, well, wait a minute. Like, are you going to like this if somebody build your own platform. Build your own platform. And then some guy buys it. And they're like, yeah, this doesn't feel so good now that we're on the other end of it. And that's
the guys that tried to make Parler happen. They shut that down.
Destroyed.
When it was picking up heat.
They were hacked. They were personally attacked. Right? And so instead of people going, the market does better when we have competition, they go, we only want one, and it's good that was snuffed out. And you don't realize that's what the government wants you to do. Yep. They want you to have single source information, single places to go.
Then we're fucking China, man. Like,
right, we're fucked.
And our language has been like what's actually happening. It's corporatism. It's actual fascism. It's actually what's going on in China, where they restrict social media. Apple freaking cut off AirDrop because that's how they were sending protest footage to people in the vicinity. And the fucking left and the media have done such a good job with painting over words like, well, they point words like fascism and Nazism at people, anyone right of center, basically, when what they're actually doing is closer to fascism. But they've manipulated the language such that it's just, oh no, we're evolving. We know better. This is we're not pushing the trans agenda on kids. We're being extra nice. We're being inclusive. And it's just the mind
we're just enforcing those rules. The rules that we've determined are better. Instead, when you go, well, the collusion between private sector and the state is the textbook definition of fascism. That should make everybody very uncomfortable. They go, well, no, not when it's done for a good reason, though.
No,
and
it's
like,
mean
holy
tweets.
Shit.
It's mean tweets where someone calls me obese.
Right. And that's something that they say, well, we should have that. And you're looking at the Constitution and you're like, did you ever read this? Did you ever go over this in school? This is the problem, is that this will inevitably result in censorship and government corruption, because they're going to use this as a method to say this is a speak and thought that's acceptable, and this is speech and thought that is unacceptable. And when they can bully the private industry, what's the difference? If Twitter's taking orders from the Bureau, what's the difference between that and the FBI actually running Twitter? Like, if it gets to the point where everything that gets something like the laptop story can get crushed, and God knows how many other little things can get crushed. At some point, what is the difference between a social media company being run actually by the Bureau? They don't have the manpower and the expertise.
The Bureau
to
doesn't
do it.
have to learn code.
No, they don't have to learn how to
They're
code.
like, great, you guys do it.
You guys do it, and then you give us the information we want. You censor and twist and bend speech the way you want, which of course then means the things that we see have an impact directly on the things we think. There's no way to separate those two. The things you see will impact the things you think. If you don't see certain information, if you're not allowed to talk about certain things, it's going to absolutely have an impact on public discourse. Right. Yeah. You need that. And when the government says, yeah, but what if it's from Russia? I say, well, at this point, I would rather deal with Russian disinformation and have debates and arguments about that publicly and sort it out than you pre-chew my food for me and spit it in my mouth and tell me this is better for you. You don't want to, there could be something hard in there that could hurt you. So I'm going to just vomit in your mouth and swallow it. And you go, yeah, this is best. And that's where we're at now.
Thank you, mommy.
Yeah. Thank you, mommy. Like, you know, I'm glad I didn't have to deal with any issues of chewing on something hard.
They're teaching us not to think, not to debate, not to be intellectually curious, like literally trying to breed the fight out of us.
And as comics and honestly as lawyers, that is so counterintuitive to our nature, because that's all we do is think about things and then think about how to word things and think about, if I make a joke in a certain way, is there a counter to that joke that, like, the joke could be reductive and be kind of funny and know that it's not generally factually accurate. But lots of times, you know, for me in particular, I try to be like accurate, right? I want to be accurate enough that someone's like, that's a stupid premise for a joke because it's factually doesn't even make any sense. But if you go in, like, you know, if you go to a comedy club and 6 comics in a row come up, say the same stupid fucking Trump joke, the same stupid, it's a slight variation on the same dumb Trump joke.
Oh, you mean late night television?
Right. That's right. Exactly. Like that should be a red flag to us all, that you're not all geniuses, that you're all actually have been bent by social media to think the same things. And you're all coming up with the same 5 or 6 jokes.
They're baking the same cake, but in different containers. They all use the same.
Exactly. Mix. Perfect analogy.
It's like,
you're like, it's the same fucking cake.
That's a funnel cake. That's a fucking angel cake. It's all the same shit. It all tastes the same.
And then somebody comes up and says, you know, I made a quiche. And you're like, get them out of here. You're like, no, this could be like the new thing. This is an interesting. Why did you make it that way? Why did you put the frosting this way?
A quiche is a threat to our democracy, Vinny.
Yeah, then that exactly. Yeah. No quiches. It's a threat to our democracy, and it's not safe for consumption. How do you know? Did you eat it? I just know it's not safe for consumption. Get it out of here. Whereas people like me and people like you are like, well, let us determine what's safe for us. Let us determine. Let us debate it out. And the people that are and this goes hand in hand with what we've observed over the last decade, which is making young people the safe space notion. This fits right into that, because once you accept the fact that challenging somebody thought-wise, that makes them feel like it's a microaggression and unsafe, then the government gets to come in and say, we're going to keep you safe. And oh, by the way, just throw the First Amendment out. Just get rid of the First Amendment because we can't keep you safe. And you go, yes. And that's why so many people, you see these polls, don't understand the First Amendment and aren't for the First Amendment. They're like, yeah, we could give or take the First Amendment. Why? Because they're like, we would rather be safe. We would rather not hear a bad word that makes us feel shitty than have to be able to say in the words that we want. It's better for us to just not have to hear that. People like you and me, it drives us insane, because we were like, well, if you say something to me that hurts my feelings, we're going to go home and think about it and say, is it true? Maybe it hurts a little bit because there's a part of it that's true. Yeah.
Why am I triggered? It's because I know that I need to lose the last 10 pounds, right? If that didn't bother me, what triggers you is what bothers you. And there's sometimes like a negative truth in there. And you can, when you zoom out far enough, you can see it's like, oh no, they're trying to breed the next generation to not fight, because if you're not thinking, you're trading what you think safety is for speech.
Why do you clip a bird's wings?
You
know,
training us to be small and obedient
and compliant.
And
take the information that they give you, and it's been pre-processed, it's been pre-chewed,
and you know what?
It goes down easy
because they couldn't keep up with the fucking internet and as much information that was getting out to people. It's just exploded on them. and like the government's been shitting their pants because they've been able to pretty much control like before the internet, like they can control what comes out on the presses.
Oh
They
yeah.
control what messages they put into our television and movies, and now it's just exploded on them. And like I know I'm saying this like I am probably like a low information person, but we talk about like that time of 2014, 2015. This is like what, as Trump is running, I feel like the powers that be were like, because what, who was still in office then? Oh, was it Obama, or was it right as Trump is running? Trump ran against Hillary. They're probably like,
Yeah.
Hillary's gonna win.
Yep.
We're gonna do what
Yep.
we need to do to get her to win. And which I feel like they were planning on Hillary having 2 administrations. So it's like
Yeah.
Obama, 2 administrations of
Mhm.
Hillary. And I bet they had like a 3 administration plan.
Yeah.
Probably definitely in bed with like, you know, Ukraine, China, very dirty, corrupt business dealings, just a lot of influence peddling, and just Trump like fucked it all
Yeah.
up. And I
Yeah.
think that's why after he won, like a lot of shit got crazy, because I feel like the powers that be were scrambling for like, how do we do what we want to
Yeah.
get done? How the fuck did he get here? How do we make sure this never happens again? And how do we accomplish what we wanted to do with like essentially Obama's 3rd term?
Yeah, he Napstered the government. He Napstered the government. When Napster came out, it was a fucking joke for like a year. And then the recording industry was like, Jesus Christ, how are we going to deal with this technology, with this it's information? How are we going to take this down, because it's threatening our business model, the way things have been done for the last 50 fucking years, 100 years in the recording industry, in the music industry. And I think when Trump was running, it was a joke. I mean, there's endless clips out there, people laughing, about the idea of him even winning the primaries. And then he wins, and you're right. They're like, so now what are we going to do? And then going back to what I said, I think it's a really dangerous thing when people believe that this is a common theme for corruption, no matter at whatever level, is that most of the time people don't do bad things because they think they're bad, outside of people with severe mental illness. Most of the time, even mobsters, when they killed somebody, there was always a reason for it. And from their perspective, it was justified. Now, sometimes it's delusional.
Respect or safety of their family, or
exactly. Or like, listen, he was threatening this, he was threatening that. I could have ended up in jail. This could have impacted my family. This could have impacted my money, which would have made my family lose all this, whatever. So there's always some sort of moral justification for it. And it can be really dangerous, because people look at Nazi Germany and how did this happen? And one of the cool things that every FBI class does is they go to the Holocaust Museum. You spend the entire day there, and there's a whole section that you learn about how did the SS, how did the law enforcement in Germany become such a big part of genocide. And, it's easy to say they're really evil. Then you can just, they're evil. Then you walk out. And then what you learn about it is they weren't evil in like the sense of you think. They were evil in that they were slowly conditioned to start to lose focus of what was right and wrong. And in their mind, they were saving their country. They were like, oh my God, the Jews are going to destroy Germany. And this is for Mother Germany. And this is to save my family. And you go, how is that possible? Well, anyone living right now shouldn't be able to look at the Holocaust and say, how does that ever happen? Because now more than ever in my life, it's so relatable to me that you can see people, when COVID happened, you could see how close we were coming to, it's up to you whether you get it. You should get it. You must get it. Well, if you don't get it, now you got to be at home. Now you can't shop. Now you shouldn't have a bank account. And then people going so far as saying, as far as I'm concerned, they could die and I don't give a shit about them. That all happened inside of a year and a half.
They shouldn't be allowed in society.
Right. Tell me how. So when you say, how did people look at Jewish people and slaughter them and go on with their day? And in a mere 2 years, we saw that in this country, people saying they shouldn't even be allowed to be in society. Are we that far away from saying euthanize them, kill them then? They're a risk to you, right? They're not going to get vaccinated. They're going to get you sick. You believe this thing's going to kill you. Those people were like this far away from being like convinced. I'm positive it went on for another year. You would have an actual movement of people saying these people shouldn't even be allowed to be alive.
If the government wanted to enforce, like if they wanted to give like basically make like COVID hall monitors and hand out like guns to people and say, you know what, this is your directive.
Right.
Handle people who don't get it. There would be people.
Yeah.
Couldn't wait to stand
raising
up
their
and do
hand.
that.
Hollywood would be on board in a second. Hollywood would
Yep.
be the first to be on board. They'd be out promoting it because they don't deal with this shit. They're behind their walls anyway. They don't want it getting to them. So they're going to convince everybody that these people should not be a part of society. And so it's a very, once you start establishing
as long as they can stay going, as long as they can keep making a living, they'll do whatever. They're literally actors. They're literally there to do your bidding.
Empty vessels, most of them. Empty vessels who are there to regurgitate lines, and whether they're politically based lines or script based lines, it's really not that much of a difference.
Yeah. Whether they're in a movie or they're like, what's his face? Elliot Page, like that's still, like, as far as I'm concerned, like that's the role of a lifetime right there. Like you are a trans addict. You have been cast in this role. This is what you're doing. And like I wouldn't put it past Hollywood to be like, yeah, you're gonna transition and this is your life now, but you'll stay relevant and we'll pay you X amount.
Exactly. It's a great way to accomplish that, and probably in their mind not that very different. But it scares me because when people talk about extremism, I'm like, but wait a minute. One side of this is actually the side being painted as evil is actually saying, well, we kind of respect your right or your personal autonomy, and the other side is like, yeah, we don't respect yours, but it's like what you're being painted at is the opposite. And so you're like, this is so weird to me. It's like you have a whole group of people that are just like, yeah, for the most part, we really don't care what you do. We just want government out of our lives. We just want this personal autonomy. And then they're like, yeah, you're a fascist. And you're like, but no, I'm saying the non-fascist thing. You're the one saying you should have to blah, 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 blah. You can't say, you can't do. And it's almost, it's like this epic form of international gaslighting that we're doing, where we're acting in a certain way and it's being pushed on half of the world. And then that half of the world is actually being told, you're doing that. You're the one who's fascist.
And they do that with a lot. They do that with like the pedophilia claims. They do that with, you can't meme. No, your side can't meme. No, your side has pedophiles. And it's like, you're just what? Like the media is a powerful thing. Like they've been hearing for years that what they're actually practicing is fascism, and that no, the other guys are fascist, and because Trump is fascist and Orange Man bad and anyone who likes him is bad. It's like, again,
even
it's like them training people to think simply and narrowly.
Yes.
It's safer that way. If you can just disregard half the population of the country, like, whew, that's a lot simpler.
I said that to a guy on Twitter just this past weekend. I was waiting to pick up my kid from karate, and I'm sitting in the car, and someone posted something about Ukraine, I think it was, and then I made a comment about it wasn't harsh in any kind of way, but I think it kind of the sum and substance of the tweet was like, I'm not a fan of the war, right? And then some guy writes and puts this picture. It's like, fuck you, Russian propagandist. And I'm sitting in the car and I'm like,
I'm just a man from Long Island.
Right? Like, yeah,
Russia's not interested in me.
I'm like, so that's your answer to this sort of whatever joke I made, but it had a point, and the point was kind of like, this is stupid and pointless. And your answer to that is because I have expressed dissent. I'm not for it. You don't argue with me and say, why do you feel that way? Or come at me with an actual merit-based argument. I'm a Russian propagandist. I was an FBI agent for 11 years. How the fuck am I a Russian asset? How does somebody become so reductive in their thinking, like you said, so simple? So I wrote back to the guy and I was like, I kind of envy you, because we got into a little back and forth because he was so simple. I was like, it must be, I don't, sometimes you sit there and you think about these things and they kind of get you upset because you worry about the future. And then you go to be this dude, his name was like Yogi. I'm like, I wish I was Yogi. Yogi's a fucking idiot. Yogi is so black and white that because I dared say, I'm not sure this war's a great idea, which, by the way, historically, odds are I'm right and you're wrong, asshole.
Yeah.
Odds are, because every fucking military engagement we've had in my lifetime has turned into whoopsie daisy. Turns out there was no WMDs. Turns out we can't fucking win the hearts and minds. It's worse off than it was before. And your answer to that is to call me a Russian propagandist. And then I'm like, does it make you feel stupid to learn that I was an FBI agent for 11 years? He goes, that just tells me what a traitor you are. I'm like, this doesn't get any simpler.
Dude, because people have been convinced that any form of debate is a personal attack, and we can't separate personal insults and being personally disrespected from like a mingling of ideas. People need to separate their ideas from themselves, and like the two have been melded over the years, and so now any kind of debate or challenging of your idea is like a personal attack, and it's like we've gotten to this. Oh, your adrenaline is pumping. You're like, you have this fight or flight. Like you feel like you are being attacked. Block. I mean, like even this conversation we're having makes me want to go into my Twitter and literally unblock everyone I've ever blocked, because I just don't want to even unconsciously be creating a world for myself that's like I'm slowly echo chambering myself. Like even probably a lot of them are trolls and just like people who straight up me and are retards, but like, you know, that's the scariest thing, that we could just be unconsciously creating.
If you're like me,
worlds.
Exactly. If you're like me, and I have a, you know, I've only been on Twitter for the last, you know, couple years, and so I deal with a lot less noise than you do, right? I have a much smaller following, but I'm very conscious of who I block. I probably only blocked 1 or 2 people in the last couple of years.
Wow.
Because
you're a Russian propagandist.
Yes, I need those Russian bots following me. No, but honestly, it's because I don't want to do what you just did. And I think that's a great way to think about it is, am I blocking this person because they're debating me and they're making strong points and it's making me look stupid? Or am I blocking this person because they've now resorted to personal attacks and they're just not productive and fuck you asshole, fuck you this. The only person I ever blocked, I think, was that.
They're tweeting names of people I know, or fucking my family, that's or my address, or like,
that's different. You should never block. This is my rule of thumb. You should never block someone who's keeping it respectful and someone who's making a merit-based argument. And even if they're embarrassing you, it's stupid to block them, because you're going to end up doing exactly like you said, in my opinion. You're going to create an echo chamber of a voice that actually, there's things I think now that I didn't think 5-10 years ago. And if I had shut those people out of my lives, I might not have ever really come around to the things I think now that I think are more, correct, whatever the fuck that means. But yeah, you should feel free to block trolls that are simply there to disrupt your life in a non-productive way. If I'm not learning anything from the debate and you're just making personal attacks, why should I have to sit there and listen to you call me names or whatever, bring up names of family members? But outside of that, I think people do tend to block. You see this all the time. Somebody scores a point in an argument and then the other person blocks them. And you're like, so what did you just do? Like you ended the debate because they scored a point instead of coming back and thinking about that and conceding. You know how many times on Twitter I'm like, that's a good point. You're right on that. It doesn't make me feel like less of a fucking human being that you made a point off of something. And if there's a point that it's just like, okay, well, that's a good point. I've been arguing with people about electric vehicles, right? And again, people think I'm like anti-electric vehicle. I'm just making the counterpoint, because the people who are like, oh my God, we're going to eliminate all this. I'm like, yeah, in like 30 years, believe me, we're not anywhere near, we're getting there. It's amazing, but let's pump the brakes and realize when we're talking about transitioning off of fossil fuels to electric, and people are like solar and windmills. Well, in my experience with those technologies, I've been kind of disappointed. And here's the limitations of that. And so those are cool debates to have. And I've learned a lot, in the last, year of engineers saying, these are some advances we've made. Maybe you didn't know about this. Maybe you didn't
but God forbid you mention how many fossil fuels it takes to create these electric cars.
Right. And that's exactly it. That's something people need to think about when they say, oh, look at all these batteries, look at this. And you say, well, how do you create that? How do you generate that? How do you sustain that? How do you recycle that? What about the environmental toll of mining for the lithium and things like that? Yeah. If you don't have an answer for that and you block me because I ask you that question, then you're creating that echo chamber.
It's like
in your life.
Thing. It's like, oh, they scored 1 point. And you know what that allows you to do? It makes you go, fuck, okay, I got to go research this some more. I got to go take a couple weeks, do some more reading.
Exactly.
And
it hardens you.
It's a gift.
Intellectually.
It's like a gift. It's like, oh, you're letting me know where my gaps are that I need to fill in, or you're allowing me the opportunity to change my opinion, which is so great. So it's like when I get somebody who, like, a lot of tweets I've been getting lately, I think it's because I did a show with Gavin McGinnis, and my Twitter following is ticking up a bit, I'll get these tweets like, all your friends are Nazis and pedophiles. So it's like, what do I do? Do I block because that's annoying, or do I not block and I write what is making you say that, or what makes you think that? Like, who exactly do you think? And just like let them make themselves look dumb.
That's exactly it. Let them make them. When we were children, or I think I'm older than you, and this was a very
no, I'm way younger. Never mind.
Yeah, you're way younger. But when I was a kid, I don't know how many years this lasted. I can guarantee you it's never said now. But when I was a kid, this was an example used ubiquitously. It's used across the board in every classroom. Every kid I know will tell you that when you're learning about the Constitution and in particular the First Amendment, the example would be given that when the KKK rallies in DC, and they were doing it every year, I have no idea if they still do it now or whatever, that the argument was that everybody unanimously in the class found that behavior disturbing, that nobody was a fan of the KKK. And everyone understood, though, the principles are that they have a right to say those things and to march and to assemble. And then we have a right to engage them in debate and make them look stupid, right? So when you get a KKK member up debating somebody, that's how you win that battle of thoughts, because the thoughts that are based on logic will beat out the thoughts that are just purely based on hate. And where we've transitioned now as a society is, if you said, "Hey, did you hear the KKK's rallying in DC?" And I'm like, "Those fucking idiots." And then someone's like, "Yeah, man, they shouldn't be allowed to do that." You're like, "No, actually, they do have a right to assemble, and it's a First Amendment protected activity." My life could be over because of that statement if I were to say that, right? Because people would be like, "Are you supporting the KKK?" And you're like, "Don't take my advocacy for the principles behind the First Amendment as an advocate for the message." Yeah, I don't give a fuck about. I don't support the message. I support the activity, because that same thought today. Back then, the idea of having racist an ideology or a group based on racist ideology, the government could decide tomorrow that me saying that the sun is the center of the solar system is suddenly now inappropriate, false think, evil think, and I could end up in jail. So I want everyone, again, to going back to our argument about we just want the rules equally applied. I understand that if they have the right to say that, then there's nothing the government can do legally to destroy my life if I have a thought that one day becomes unpopular. And my thought could be as simple as we all have a right to live, whether we're vaccinated or not. And the government could decide.
They don't have the foresight to think that they'll ever have a thought that's non-popular.
Isn't that crazy?
They're like, no, we've been on the right team for all these years, so I'm always going to be on the right team.
The arrogance that we're at they believe that when I love this is when people go back and criticize movies and comics, and they're like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, do you understand how evolution of thought happens? Do you understand that the founding fathers cannot be judged by the moral standards of today? And then when I tell people, do you think 200 years from now, what you're tweeting and what you think and what you do is going to stand up to what the moral norms are 200 years from now? And people are like, yeah, because we're right. I'm like, you're right. We've peaked as a society, and you finally found out what's right, what's wrong, and there's going to be no evolution beyond this point. And 200 years from now, they're going to be like, Susie Smith, you were so fucking right what you tweeted. I guarantee you will be a monster. 200 years from now, you'll be considered a monster in what you think you're doing. I don't know if that's going to be a good or a bad thing for that reason, but you'll be considered a monster. So judging people historically based on what was acceptable thought back then, or given the context, we've also lost that ability. Because now if you do something 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter that was the thing. How many people out there have a video of them with a Confederate flag on their car and are like, oh my God, scrub your iCloud because God forbid this video ever comes out, my career will be over. Meanwhile, you're like, but 20 years ago, people weren't looking at it that way.
Yeah.
And there's no allowance for that. We're so woke. There's no allowance for you evolving as a human being and as a civilization, us evolving as a society, saying we're going to start out and be kind of funky. But we had these people who created this document, which was like the most brilliant thing ever fucking written, that established human rights and established limitations on the government for the first time ever in a way that was enforceable in a first time ever, that a whole group of people left another country, believed in so much, fought wars to defend it, and built the most advanced, prosperous civilization in the history of mankind. And they're like, but yeah, they were slaves. And you're like, holy shit. Like,
Are we really getting hung up on fucking slaves? Yeah. Like, okay.
It's like, that was what was happening back then.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't invent it, but we fucking abolished it. So it's like, I always give this analogy to people. Imagine your husband, your wife, your fiance, you meet them at 22 years old and saying, yeah, I'm not going to marry him though. And you're like, why? And like, he had like 5 girlfriends before. And like, he used to be an emo dude. He was like a skateboarder. And then he got into rap for a while. He thought it was a rapper.
Yeah.
You're like,
he went to too many proms.
Right. You're like, but that's his evolution, right? You might not like it, but to say like, what did you think your boyfriend or your husband or your wife like hatched into the human being they are now?
In their current form? Yeah.
Right? If you're not embarrassed of the person you were in a healthy way, then you're in a state of arrested development.
Grown. Yeah.
Right. If you're not embarrassed, like I think about the things I said and did at 16, and I'm getting hot like thinking about it. I'm like, oh, if you're not, every one of us should be like, yeah, I was a fucking idiot. I was an asshole. I thought I knew it all. And I think I've turned into a much better human being. But there are people out there that, just like they look at the country, believe that a country should just kind of like come into existence and all woke. It's like it was just born and woke and everybody said the right thing. And there wasn't a maturation process. There wasn't like a, soul searching done by a nation. I don't know how. And once I saw that turning publicly, people starting to judge the United States in this sort of unrealistic way of like, show me a country on the face of this planet that doesn't have original sin. We all have original sin. Every nation on this planet. The difference is that there's many countries that are still living like this. Slavery still exists.
We all used to be kind of fucking savages. Like not that long ago. So it's crazy. And people think, oh, like wokeness is the way. And then people have been hypnotized because it's been dressed up as equality and the right thing to do and the humanitarian. It's literally the Trojan wokeness is the Trojan horse that's like ushering in actually more control and division. And one side gets to bully the other. And it's very sneaky. It's so sneaky.
It's always done under the guise of like, kindness and consideration. And all I see is manipulation, division. Like that's what it really is sowing. It's not making us ask ourselves this. Has it made us closer as a country? This country's never been in my lifetime as divided as we are. And many people, I think rightfully so, are talking about like, is a civil war imminent? Is this something that we're going to be talking about 10 years from now that, this country just says we can no longer coexist because we've become, I do truly believe there's like half the country that really doesn't understand the Constitution and the principles behind it and want to live a very different life.
Yeah.
And
so many people want to be controlled. Like, they want a COVID-like state forever.
Right.
They want to be told, yes, please stay the fuck home. Let me take my foot off the gas pedal. Life is hard. I don't want to be challenged. I don't want to think. Can we just watch Tiger King forever, please?
Yeah. And then the rest of us go, where's this money coming from you're giving me? What's it going to do to the power of the dollar?
Yeah.
Are we going to have hyperinflation? Right. Right. We all think and half the country just believes that like the government can just print money and keep handing it out to other countries and us. And then it's not going to impact us. Whereas people, 50, 60, 100 years ago, we were so much closer to poverty. We were so much closer to people lived through the Great Depression. People lived through wars that they were like, whatever we can do to avoid this from happening, we need to do because this is awful. And now we've become so soft because we've done so much. And because we live in a world where if my kids wait 30 seconds for something, it's like a monumental, like, this is bullshit. Like, anything, it doesn't matter anymore. That they think that you can just keep spending and the government can just give you and provide for you and give you. And then they don't see the other side of that is that when it ultimately collapses on itself, because the government, this may be a shock to people, but the government doesn't make money. It spends our money. We make the money.
Mm.
They take it from us, and then they spend it. And when we're no longer able to make money, they don't have the money to spend. And then the economy collapses and we're eating our fucking dogs. And people think that would never happen. Oh my God, that would never happen. And I'm like, we're like 2 weeks away from that happening at any given moment. Like if the dollar collapses, if the economy collapses, and you think $5 gas, when gas is $10 or $20, then everyone's going to go, how did we get here? And people like us are going to be like, we got here through wokeness and promises of the government taking care of us. And the government is full of fucking idiots by and large. I don't know how anyone doesn't pick up on this.
My student loans aren't getting paid for.
Yeah, your student loans. And then they go, well, why not? Why don't we pay for this? Why don't we pay for that? And everyone go and then no one goes, where's the money going to come from? Where we can't just print. And the government goes, yeah, we can print money, which again, going back to the Bitcoin thing, right? Where I get so fascinated by it is the ability to take the money away from the government and be like, you can't control this, you can't create it, and you can't dilute it. Like and right out of the gate value. To me, right? I'm like, so this is something that the government, there's 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be created, and there's no way to create more. And the government is powerless to seize it like a company and be like, we're just going to print another 21 million because a war happened and we want to give them 21 million Bitcoin. So we're just going to, you have no ability to do that. And this is why it scares the shit out of the government, is because it's separated for the first time in history of the technology to separate that from them. And this is something that, imagine that the government has the ability to print money. They can just print it. They don't need to vote on it.
Yeah,
we don't need to approve it. They can,
on gold. Now gold. What, based on the idea of gold?
Like, yeah, it's just based on some people will say it's based on the military. It's based on the that we're a superpower, that we have the military to back up and enforce people to basically accept the value of it.
IOU.
But it's just garbage. I mean, the US dollar has decreased in value like 99% in the last, I don't know, fucking 50 years or something.
But it's like they want to keep it the global standard. I feel like so much shit is happening because
it's control.
Yeah.
It's control. I mean, if we move away from the US dollar as the global standard, what does that say for the government? Here's what people need to understand is like the future, the world in the future, advanced civilizations won't have governments. They'll laugh at this. This is like praying to the sun god, and like they're like, so let me get this straight. You guys still have like this group of people you elect, and they go and do this goofy shit, and half of it's done behind your back, and you're forced to reelect one idiot side versus another idiot side. Advanced civilizations will move away from this, and that power and control will go back to the individuals, and they'll have the technology like Bitcoin to say, how do we control this? We take the rulers away from the rules. You said with Bitcoin, you say for the first time in history, when Satoshi created Bitcoin in 2008, it was, how do we get the rules set and get rid of the rulers and the ability for people to change the rules when it's convenient? And we didn't have the technology to do that up until that point. And then he created this thing which says we basically wind up the clock. And once the clock goes, nobody can change the rules. And that to me is so appealing, because I don't want a right-leaning president to change the rules, and I don't want a left-leaning president to change the rules when it comes to money. I don't want a right-leaning president to start a bunch of wars and give a bunch of money away, and now my dollar is worth half of what it was 5 years ago because you printed it into obsolescence. And I don't want someone leaning left to do the same thing for their own stupid fucking reasons, right? Student loan forgiveness.
Yeah. Okay, this is going to be a very dumb question, but I know very little about Bitcoin. Where did Bitcoin get? You have a fridge right there. Oh my God. Is this your man cave?
I work from home. So yeah, this is where I work. There's another monitor over here.
That's yeah. What are you drinking? What's going on?
Someone left us. We had a party this weekend.
Topo Chico spike seltzer. Is that what that
is? Hard seltzer. Someone brought this. I don't know.
Yes, it's Topo Chico hard seltzer. I'm like familiar with every.
I've never had them before, but they're pretty good.
They're okay.
Somebody left it.
High noon.
So, sorry, your question about
where does and this might bore.
Where does the value come from?
Anybody watching who already knows this, but it's like, how do you create a currency? Where does the value for this currency even come from?
Yeah, and the SBF and the FTK thing is a prime example of this. And again, we're kind of in our infancy, but what happened was back in 2008, a guy who nobody knows who he is was getting pissed off about the government's printing money and inflation. And he said, and for about 20 years, we've been working on trying to create a digital version of money, but it always failed because there were some things we just couldn't solve for. Imagine somebody designing like a jet engine for a plane, and you're like, we're close, but there's this thing that we can't solve for. And then somebody comes along and solves it and says, no, we've fixed that issue. And now we've made it where there's all these checks and balances built into this software. And then everyone downloads the software in their house and runs it. And that's like their vote. It's called a node. But everyone's computer running the software, which is free and cheap and easy and open source, everybody can look at it, basically votes on the rules. And everybody votes to keep these rules the same. And the government, for them to try to create more votes, more nodes, would be so cost prohibitive. It's actually impossible now for governments to bend the rules because it's been taken on, just like the internet, right? Just like the adoption of the internet. And so the program itself, when it starts, without getting technical, it generates Bitcoin through the process of these computers doing these calculations. And then those Bitcoin can be transferred to any people as they're coming out. The people who discover that Bitcoin, think of it like solving a math problem. You could run a computer from your home. And I did this for years. And to give you an idea, I did this when Bitcoin was like maybe $50 a coin. And I was running these Bitcoin
Why? What
miners.
is it now?
It's like 17,000. But I got into it when Bitcoin was like $10 a coin. So I bought these miners. I was still at the FBI. I wanted to learn more about Bitcoin because we were investigating cases where bad guys were using it for bad things. And I'm like, this has to be a fucking Ponzi scheme.
Bad coin.
Bad coin, right? And this is where the Silk Road and all those other things came into existence. And people were selling drugs and guns and child porn. And Bitcoin was kind of being used. In hindsight, it makes total sense because it's a new technology that bad guys typically adopt new technologies. They find ways to use it before the good guys do. But anyway, so mining Bitcoin, which is how Bitcoin's created, means you get a computer and it does these calculations. It's basically trying to figure out a math problem. And I know I'm dumbing this down. There's anyone in the chat, but
dumb it down for me. I need it.
Yeah, they're doing like a math problem. That's part of the program. And the program says whoever can figure out this math problem first gets awarded X amount of Bitcoin. And it's 50 Bitcoin back then. And every 10 minutes, this math problem is solved based on the worldwide computing power. So this is so super cool. The program looks out and says, how many computers are trying to solve this problem? And to put it into simple terms, let's say
like monkeys typing on typewriters,
right.
And they eventually come up.
Exactly. It's exactly like that. Because actually it's very random. It's not like the problem they're trying to figure out is basically a guessing game. So the more computer horsepower you can throw at it, the faster you're going to get to guess right. And what that creates is an arms race where other people try to use more powerful computers to guess. I was using laptops in the early days, and then I could use PCs, and then you had to use PCs with graphics cards. And then they went to these ASIC computers, which are like computers that only do this. But imagine using a laptop at your desk back in the day, back in 2011, 2012, and it would just run and try to solve this problem. And when it did, you were awarded by the network. You unlocked a code. And inside of that lockbox that you unlocked was 50 Bitcoin. Back then, that's a lot, right? 50 times 17,000 is insane. Except Bitcoin back then was worth like a penny. It was worth like half a penny. So there were people earning thousands of Bitcoin a week.
Wow.
And didn't know they were sitting on what would be hundreds of millions, billions of dollars 10 years later. So there are people who've thrown out computers with billions of dollars worth that are going to landfills trying to find them.
No.
Yeah. The first use case of Bitcoin, documented use case, is a guy who went to a local pizzeria and convinced the pizzeria to sell him 2 pizza pies, Papa John's, for Bitcoin. He gave them 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. Do the math on that. 10,000 times 17,000. Hundreds of millions of dollars he paid. That pizzeria guy was sitting on. Now, I never heard whether the pizzeria guy kept them or he probably just threw them away because it's digital. So he probably had on a thumb drive and threw it away, like so many of us did. And so when it gets created, what ends up happening is that the more people who try to solve this problem, the stronger the network gets, because anyone trying to attack the network means they have to like overcome that computing power of everyone else. So it's a very brilliant way to build up a defense of saying the more people who are doing this the right way, that means the more computers you're going to need to overthrow those people. And very quickly, it goes into the numbers where the cost of doing this would be trillions of dollars, and you could just never take over the Bitcoin network. So it's a very brilliant way that it was done. And so every 4 years, the number of Bitcoin awarded gets halved. So as people are doing these calculations, it's called a difficulty adjustment. The program looks at it and says, we have 100 computers trying to find out this code. So let's make the difficulty for the next question this difficulty level, because it should take them 10 minutes to figure out. And if a bunch of people join and start doing this and it gets solved in 5 minutes, the difficulty will go down or up. So it actually adjusts on a 2-week cycle. And so I was mining Bitcoin in my house with these, by today's standards, primitive miners, and I was making about $10 a day. The cost of the electricity to run these machines was about $10 a day. They're like, it's like running a space heater 24/7. Wow. Now, when Bitcoin hit 69,000, I went back and looked at the Bitcoin I made back then, and I was making about, again, this is a while ago when I did the math, but I was making about $15,000 a day in my garage.
Oh my God. That's better than OnlyFans.
Yeah, a day.
And you didn't have to show your butthole.
No, never had to show my asshole. Wow. It became a constant source of debate in my house because the machines created heat. I had them in my TV room. My wife said, get these fucking things out of here. I put them in the garage. I had paint cans like melting in there. It was so hot because they kick off a ton of heat. Wow. Eventually, I piped the miners into the heating system of the house when I moved. So I was heating my house with Bitcoin miners and making money with it. So it's a long conversation.
The only type of miners you do want in your house, right?
That's it. Yeah, they'll actually can heat your house and it don't smell like shit. So that's how it works. And then the beauty of it is, and the reason why I fell in love with it when I was at the FBI was that when you're saying, okay, well, I could know the address, the wallet, it's called the wallet address of the bad guy. He could literally tell me, I'm sitting on $50 million in Bitcoin. Here's my address. And my first instinct at the FBI was like, all right, well, let's get the probable cause and seize it. And then when you realize you can't, you're like, oh my fucking God, this is going to change everything. Because if I can't get it at the FBI, and I know we couldn't get it at the FBI, there was ways we could, if they fucked up, we could get it. If they left it on their laptop and it wasn't encrypted, and they left it out in their desk and it wasn't encrypted or was open, or you get a private key, it's 12 words that if you memorize those 12 words, that can unlock your Bitcoin. Well, if you write down those 12 words on a piece of paper and you leave it and I do a search warrant in your house, yeah, I can seize it. But if those 12 words are in your head or on a piece of paper that you hide in a fucking tree trunk in your backyard in a plastic bag, and your butthole on a tattoo around your rim, we'll never get it.
Only your wife can read it.
Right, which would be a great way, right, to hide your Bitcoin. But that made me realize this is a game changer.
It'd be Buttcoin then.
Yeah, but then your OnlyFans, you could never show your butthole on OnlyFans.
Right. Because you could give away your code. All right,
your seed.
A couple of questions coming for you that I forgot to read from David Carpenter. Vinny, with the FBI's poor reputation and politicization over the last few years, do you see a useful future for the agency, or should it be disbanded?
This was such an easy question years ago, and it's actually a really difficult question now, and it pains me to say that. I don't think it could be should be disbanded. I think it could be salvaged. I think the FBI should go back to focusing on criminal work. When people talk about the FBI being a premier law enforcement agency, people don't realize the law enforcement part of it is very critical to that statement, meaning we became an intelligence agency after 9/11. And there's a whole podcast on that topic. But basically, the FBI, if you were alive and an adult during that time period, may remember, was under attack because of the failures, right? How did 9/11 happen? And the FBI is like, well, because, we're basically we're a criminal law enforcement organization that does some intel, but we don't really do the intel part like super great. The CIA does, but they're not domestic. And so Mueller, in his attempt to save the Bureau, started flooding resources towards us focusing on becoming an intelligence agency more than a law enforcement agency. If we went, my humble opinion, if we went back to being a law enforcement agency, focused primarily on that, left this intelligence stuff to another agency, because it's a lose-lose scenario. I'm not really convinced there's a winnable way to do this anymore. Then I think the Bureau has a bright future. If we continue to emphasize the intelligence aspect of it, which, going back to this conversation, right, the Biden laptop thing was an intelligence exercise. There's nothing criminal about if Russia were to create a laptop, and that's an intelligence issue. That is not a criminal investigation. And boy, look how great we did in that scenario. right? Awful, just awful. And so meanwhile, I know agents that are still there that are my friends that are working phenomenal criminal investigations. They get no publicity, no attention, nothing. It doesn't matter anymore because it's overshadowed. So I think that's a legitimate question for the first time in a long time, because I know people have been calling for the disbanding of the FBI for a long time. And I thought that was kind of a preposterous question, but I think that's a legitimate question now. But I think it can be saved. It's just we gotta right the ship and focus more on law enforcement activities.
Like, isn't there enough work for them to do? Like, just tackling human trafficking, stuff with kids, drugs, the border, like the criminals coming. Like, I feel like they'd be pretty busy with that.
There is. But what happens when, going back to this conversation, it's the tail wagging the dog. What happens when the upper echelon is told by the current administration, we need to sell DT, domestic terrorism, as the biggest threat to this country, and white supremacy, white nationalism. And then they say, we're going to give you money, Bureau. You better go find the fucking cases. Well, it's the tail wagging the dog. Suddenly, we have hundreds of cases on bullshit that people working there, like, this is not what I signed up to be an FBI agent for, to chase down morons on the internet that are white nationalists. That is some guy living in a basement.
Yeah, an old lady walking into the Capitol on the 6th. Yeah, go arrest her. Go shake her down.
Yeah, or some parent at a parent-teacher or at a school board meeting, pissed off about some fucking crazy curriculum being deemed a domestic terrorist. It's bullshit. So yes, there is plenty of that. But when you have that tail wagging the dog aspect to it, and they're like, oh no, this is the big thing. And this happened after 9/11 too, right? Counterterrorism is where all the money went to the Bureau. They were like, this must be a big problem. The towers just fell. That logic is flawed though, right? Because just because the scope of the attack, the magnitude of the attack was large, doesn't mean the scope of the problem generally is large, because somebody could take advantage of a handful of vulnerabilities in how a country operates and do a lot of damage, but not have a vast network. It's 19 fucking idiots that got on a plane because our security at the airports blew, and because nobody thought about planes being used in that way. But that was translated to, there must be bomb chuckers like under every blanket, under every in every swimming pool in America. And that's where nobody at the Bureau could really say anything at that moment, because it was so disastrous. How do you argue that the problem isn't as bad as you think when 9/11 happened? But going back to, like we said, had there been someone with the courage to be like, hey, let's slow down here, because us going out investigating every single person every single cab driver who says something stupid, right? We're coming very close up against infringing on their First Amendment protected rights. And how do we investigate something that the basis of the investigation is a comment that's protected by the First Amendment? The FBI shouldn't be doing that. And B, is it a valuable use of resources? So it's a real, we've gotten ourselves, this is like a hangover from 9/11. A lot of this, all of this is like, all of this is because
too much
the Bureau changed.
It's
just in the wrong way. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very thorough. From Chipicus, I know how to legally circumvent intel oversight. I don't know if this is like.
Do I know? That's how I take your Shakespearean syntax. Yeah. Intel oversight. So the problem with intelligence and this side of the Bureau is everything I did on the criminal side, I knew at some point might be something I'd have to talk about in open court. And there would be defense attorneys cross-examining me on everything we did. Search warrants, operation of sources. When you do intelligence collection, you know that outside of what happened in the Trump era and everyone getting called to Capitol Hill, like you said about Hillary, all that stuff was never supposed to come out. The dossier, the origins of the dossier, none of that stuff was ever supposed to come out. That's because there was no criminal trial. Intelligence work is like, you could be wrong, because there's no trial, there's no constitutional issues, because there's no prosecution. What we see now is intelligence work being used to cancel people, being used to destroy political careers, being used to destroy lives. And you have no due process because you're like, well, we didn't charge you. Wow. Like, yeah, you just stole this office from me. You just, invalidated this, whatever this was, if it was an election or whatever it may be.
For example, the election or something like that, just for
right. Yeah. Minor example, right? And so how do you calculate, right? Since we all know that the laptop's legitimate, how do you calculate the impact of that on an election? You can't. So you've basically found the way to do the damage without providing the constitutional protections. And so when you say, how do you circumvent until oversight? The question's flawed because there is no real oversight. The Constitution is the oversight over every criminal investigation done in this country. There is no oversight. There's FISA courts, there's secret courts, there's people that are bureaucrats making these decisions, and they never have to explain how the people involved with the Steele dossier, right? How do they still have a job, right? How could you push something so wrong? But those people outside of a very small handful of people are still working because it's like being a weatherman. You're like, I was right half the time. You're like, meanwhile, in a criminal case, one fuck up. I fucked up once in grand jury, I remember. It almost fucking ruined my career. An honest mistake about a recording I made, I attributed to tape 57 when it was actually on tape 157.
Oh God.
And and I was like fucking sleeping at the office, worried I was going to lose my job over this.
Oh my God.
And then got grilled at trial over it, like grilled at trial over it. So that keeps you honest. Those types of things keep you honest. When you don't have to worry about that, you can just make up whatever the fuck you want. PP tape, prostitutes. Who cares? Who cares?
Wow. Yeah. Good answer. Very thorough. From Matthew Hammond, do we have to teach people to laugh again that will allow people to have difficult conversations and break out of the hive mind? Feels like we're beginning to put a dent in the free speech fight, at least as far as it looks now. I mean, Twitter is looking up.
Yeah.
I hate to just like boil this down to Twitter, but yeah, I mean, it's like culture. Like we have really trained people we've trained a sense of humor out of people. We have like made people feel guilty for laughing at the shit everyone still laughs at racial jokes, sexist jokes. Everyone still laughs at the same shit. It's just like we can't admit it anymore.
Yep. And someone sent me something the other day, like, you're in good company if you don't have to watch what you say. And I was like, yeah, that's probably pretty true. And that used to be a much larger group of people. And now it's like you're in your bedroom at night and you're like, I read a joke. Shh. Don't say it too loud.
I tweeted the other day, I'm like, freedom of speech is being able to say publicly the shit we're all already saying privately. It's
right.
Like we have to just pretend that like no one's better than anybody else. Like we're all laughing at some wrong shit. Dave wants to know what happened to JFK.
Oh, God, I know, right? Isn't it funny how like that used to be like the biggest thing growing up, and now nobody gives a shit because there's so many other ridiculously like if someone were to say ask the FBI and you could get answers to 3 questions, I think this JFK thing would be like way on the bottom. There's so many things impacting us now, right? That are like way more important for us to know.
I think my number one question would be like, how big actually is Pete Davidson's dick? That would be my number one question for the FBI. Like I've heard a lot of rumors. I feel like you guys actually know the truth.
Well, social media companies know, right? Because they're in his iCloud and they're seeing what he's sending privately in his DMs. So again, they'll know before the bureau. But I don't, I have no idea. I don't know. I have no idea what happened in JFK. Again, that happened in a time where you didn't have the internet, and you would imagine an assassination like that now, it would be much more difficult to create a conspiracy around killing the president than it would be back then. So there is value to social media. There's absolute value to it, because anyone who's thinking of doing something like that now would have to really consider everyone's got a phone. Everyone could, we have 2 different angles from Texas, and now you'd have 1,000 angles if that happened today. But I have no clue what happened in JFK.
Good night, Mr. Bend over and show me your source code. Yes. That is
that'd be embarrassing. That was a joke. If someone's gonna like attack me in the streets and be like, "Look at his asshole, he keeps the seed there." That's not the seed you're gonna find.
That's what it's called, the seed.
It's called the mnemonic seed.
I'm just trying to spread my seed.
Yeah.
Show your
all right. Seed, baby.
Matthew, when did the FBI start entrapping people to remain relevant with more than half the people in a criminal organization being undercover agents and informants?
Well, that goes back to what I said. Like, imagine, so when I worked organized crime, or if you work gangs, there's no like shortage of, I didn't have to go find defendants. Like there was too many of them. Like the people we arrested, there was like a 3-to-1 ratio of the people I arrested to the people that we had cases on, but just didn't have enough to prosecute. Whereas with my personal opinion, with a lot of these domestic terrorism cases, that's what happens is you have agents trying to do what they're supposed to do. And there's such a lack of, it's a target poor environment. There's not enough people actually doing the thing that supposedly is this big threat.
It's
so
like
now
cops trying to write tickets when it's like the end of the month or whatever. Like, well,
nobody's speeding. So instead of getting the guy doing 90, you're getting people doing 62 and a 60. And then, so the informant thing happens because, this is such a long conversation too. Like, you have to actually have certain number of informants. Why? Because Congress tells the Bureau says. So now you go out and you open up a couple of idiots as your sources because you check a box when they're useless. And then you're working on a squad trying to make cases. And someone's like, I was in a chat group the other day. And now you're like, well, go ask them this and go ask them that. The sources I had at organized crime never had to like gin up criminal activity. They just had to be around long enough and trusted long enough that eventually the criminal activity would come to them. They never went around and said, I got this idea to go murder this person. And it's unethical to do so anyway. So that's a good indication that if you have, if your ratio between informants and subjects is anywhere close to 50-50, that's a good indication, in my opinion, if you're an agent listening to this, that you're working something that probably is not a good use of taxpayer dollars. Because I can tell you from working other things, there was just too many people for us to ever investigate. We didn't have enough manpower to do it. And when it comes to counterterrorism, domestic terrorism, you actually hear the opposite from a lot of people. It's like everybody's chasing the same squirrel. Like if you get one real counterterrorism, one real domestic terrorism case, like every 5 years, it's like, oh my God, that's a lot. That's insane to me.
How much do you think the FBI was involved in January 6th?
I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I've seen some of the testimony, and the director's gone on record saying, we didn't have sources there, whatever it may be. I don't know. It happened. It's hard to say now because I left, and you just don't know what the limits of what the people in charge might do. My gut tells me that it wasn't like a direct hand in any of that. It was just more like, if they have informants involved in those discussions, put yourself in the position of the agent, and now there's something actually happening. Like that's pretty exciting. And so you're certainly not going to go out of your way to stop it. And you're certainly not going to go out of your way to like minimize it. If you're like a true believer and you believe, this is like this epic moment and there's a coup happening and, that's a big deal for you career wise and personal satisfaction wise. So I'm not confident that the way that everything's operating now, that people would understand and be able to slow that process down or understand the implications of that. But at the same time, every time I go down the rabbit hole and just look it up, I never really find any smoking guns about there actually being, there's that Ray Epps guy and other people, but you're like, I see conflicting information on who these people are and what their roles are. I don't think that's the real question, because I don't think the important question, I get why people ask that. I think the real important question is like, after it happened, was the response appropriate? And I think there's a more deeper conversation about what that meant when that happened, the resources being thrown towards those investigations and how that's being sort of spun afterwards as like the 9/11 of domestic terrorism moments.
They've had many people go inside the Capitol. The Pussy Hat crew went in there, and Pelosi called it participating in democracy. And I think shortly before the 6th, somebody was telling me that like BLM almost freaking burnt down the White House. They almost doing way worse shit than just it just pisses me off because I was there and it was always a planned march plan to go to the Capitol. And it was not like nothing Trump said. He didn't like incite any violence or incite anybody to do anything. It was this kind of boring planned rally, just like December, just like November. So it just bothers me like that the media really ran away with it, and anybody who was there knows that it was like honestly mostly chill. So
and the people that went over the line should be prosecuted. But why is everybody lumped together? Why is everybody being treated the same? You have people that on video, the doors are being open and they're walking in. I think that person should be treated very different than someone on video smashing a door down. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, those people are not the same. And so I think that's the interesting conversation. Is like, so what was it, and what which should be the appropriate reaction from the Bureau, and then
Like,
going back to what we said,
equal application.
Exactly,
of the rules.
exactly that. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna go ape shit on this. Okay, and then the logical question is, so what about all the cities that burned? Can we talk about that then? And no, it's whataboutism. It's whataboutism. No, it's equal application of the law. It's how you convince people that an agency hasn't been weaponized against a certain group of population is by saying, well, if we're going to get upset about that, and I could see why people are very upset at the idea of someone going to the Capitol, but I could also see why people are very upset at the idea of cities burning for like a year. So can we talk about how it's very confusing for someone like me to be told that one is a valid expression of their First Amendment protected activities, and you've just done $1 billion, $2 billion worth of damage in a summer, and the other is the second coming of a coup d'etat in the United States that should be considered up there next to 9/11 in terms of the impact. That's very confusing for someone like me to reconcile. And you telling me, well, because one involved regular buildings and one involved the Capitol, that doesn't get me a lot of play. I go, okay, I get it. I'll give you a little bit of points for that, but enough to offset $2 billion? No, I'd actually rather
damage was caused at the Capitol. Like what?
Right. Over a longer period of time.
One girl got shot and a few of the dudes had heart attacks that were caught. Like, come on.
Right. And then you had multiple cities over multiple months. And so there's a valid argument that the January 6th wasn't nearly as damaging as the dozen or so cities that were burned. And the death toll was much higher. The property damage was much higher. The destruction to arguably to the social fabric of the nation, the toll was much higher, or at least equal, depending on if you know. So to me, it's like we talked about through this, what starts civil wars, what starts major problems for a country is when a portion of the population feels like there are two sets of rules in how we live, and that there's no faster way to tear a country apart from the inside out. And when that percentage of those people who feel that way, who feel disenfranchised, equal 50% of the country, that's really dangerous. It's one thing if 5% of the country, you're like, well, there's always going to be somebody unhappy. There's always going to be a group unhappy. But when it's 50% of the country, and it's not the same, by the way, it's not necessarily the same, this is going to be, every election we have from now on is going to be disputed, whoever wins. When Republicans win, we can't question the election. We can question the election. When Democrats win, how dare you question democracy, and you're undermining democracy. That's the way it's going to be. And vice versa. They're going to try to delegitimize every election that a Republican wins.
They flip everything.
And flip it right, vice versa. How can we function as a society when there are two sets of rules, and that we're told to eat it on one hand? If your guy loses, eat it. If your guy wins, it was clearly illegitimate and he's a Russian puppet. And I'm worried that in the next election, if it goes in that direction, it'll be very telling for me, because if we see the script is dusted off, the Trump script's dusted off, and let's say DeSantis wins, and they go back to Russian this or illegitimate for that, we're at, like, in my mind, we're at like the Civil War point, because now we're like, so it doesn't matter who it
everyone's
is.
going,
Just,
really? Again? Fucking again? Yeah.
Now we're going to deal with impeachment hearings. We're going to deal with, a new version of the dossier. It's not going to be the exact same thing, but they'll spin it in another way. And we're going to have 4 years of somebody trying to run a country and dealing with impeachment hearings. And again, going back to your own sort of like, did you care when, when Clinton was lying under oath, and Clinton was taking advantage of a younger person and lying about it and having an affair? If you were the kind of person that was like, well, those types of things really didn't impact how he ran the country, and we should care, then you should apply that same sort of thought process to these accusations that come up, like the Stormy Daniels and all that stuff that came up. But instead, what we see is people saying that it was okay back then because it was my guy, and it's really horrible now because it's not my guy. And I'm hearing people say that more when they say, when like the Stormy Daniels thing came up, and you ask about that, and they're like, well, that was different. They're like, yeah, right. It was 1,000 times worse because he was married. He was doing this in the Oval Office, and he was doing it to somebody who wasn't a minor, but someone who was a subordinate at the lowest level, an intern at the lowest level, and it fucking destroyed her life. And nobody, and then he goes and speaks, right? And then you ruined the dress. You ruined a perfectly good dress.
Those stains will never come out.
No, and so that and it was a different time then. I will give people that, but
yeah, but people say that, but then they also want to cancel someone for a joke from 20, 30 years ago. So it's like, which way is it?
Bill Clinton should have been canceled like 100 times over. If you're really a feminist, if you're really someone who hates the patriarchy.
And then how do you respect Hillary? It's like, oh, you fucking stayed with this dude? Wow.
Right, you stay with him, and then you're supposed to be someone who wouldn't take any shit, but you stay with him, of course, for political reasons. The marriage, of course, is what it is. But like, I mean, give me a break. And then you have this woman who I always felt kind of bad for, who, like, how did she become the bad guy in all this? How did the 21-year-old intern become the bad guy in all this?
Yeah. Spin. From David Carpenter. Oh, this is an old super chat. Sorry, I ignored this. Speaking of Gino, he defended you on In Hot Water after that weird Grindel character. Oh, I had a weird wet spot show on Monday. It's like these guys are trying to do a bit, but nobody fucking told me. So it just felt like screaming for an hour, and I couldn't even do a show. Like I was like, why did I even prep a show? If these guys are going to play like fake wrestling radio podcast wars, I'm like, I had the worst fucking time. Oh
my God.
I left the show so annoyed. If they did, it's like I wasn't paying attention. I was trying to do show prep because like Kumia's show ran till 6:50. My show starts at 7. So normally I have an hour to prep. I had 10 minutes. I'm like getting everybody's handles. I'm pulling up articles. What are we going to talk about? And so I just had either they tried to explain it and I didn't hear, or it just was like
went over your head,
or nothing was. I don't recall any conversation about a fucking bit, and then I just was like,
so you left your own show? You like
no. I just had a miserable time. I just was like, it was as if like you're taking the hands off the wheel at 100 miles an hour. It's just like, wow, this is it was like so brutal and not fun for me. But I'm like, if they had fun, great. So
it sounds like Gino defended you. So
oh my God. Gino is great. Vinny, I have to have you back on. You're so easy to talk to. You're so fascinating. You're a wealth of knowledge. And I like how, I don't know, it just seems like you're open about things that, I don't know. I always thought like, oh God, they're going to get you if you talk about anything. But I guess you probably know what's fine and not fine to talk about.
Yeah, it's a process of like getting more comfortable, and the further I get away from that, believe me, it's not without risk, and there's still kind of filters you run it through, but it's important to have these conversations. And I always think of it like, all right, if someone has a problem with it and I have to talk about it, as long as I'm, I can defend what I said, and they might not agree with it, then I can live with that. But yeah, it's not without risk.
And ultimately it's like, you want to be able to trust the country you live in and the institutions that are supposed to be fucking helping us out, right? One more from Matthew Hammond, the FBI special agent of the Detroit field office, Stephen D. Antonio, over the Governor Whitmer kidnapping case, was promoted to assistant director of the Washington field office over January 6 defendants.
Yeah, the promotion process in the bureau, it's not a like a tit for tat, meaning like there is this impression. I think it's from just shitty 80s cop movies where like you get the case and they're like, you're promoted to detective. That's not how the bureau works. It's actually much more of a drawn out process that is broken in its own regard for a lot of different reasons. But having one good case, in other words, is not like you can't get a promotion. There are boxes to be checked. And so certainly that notoriety might like help you in sort of jumping some people on the list, but you have to do certain things at the bureau to get promoted. And so becoming an ASAC or assistant director, I didn't know that, is an ADIC. We have the weirdest acronyms: ASAC, ADIC.
I could go for ADIC.
Yeah, ADIC. He still has to check a bunch of boxes, but yes, all things being equal, if he's checked the same boxes as the person to the right of him, and he's got some sort of notoriety, I would imagine that would play a role in that. But it is not like a, I bet you my sources used to say that all the time. Man, when this case is done, you're going to get a promotion. I'm like, it's not how it works, dickhead. Like, I don't, I don't want to, at that point, you don't even want a promotion. But this is the thing. Like, the people who do these things, if you're only promoting people that are building these types of cases that are favorable politically, you're just compounding the problem. I don't know this guy from a fucking hole in the wall. He could be the greatest middle of the road guy on the planet. But if you're promoting these people because you're like, yeah, he was hardcore with January 6th. And what did you just do? You just brought another person into the room who's going to be saying the same fucking thing that you're saying and adding zero value, zero intellectual thought to it, zero critical thinking to it, because everyone's just going to say, let's go do this. And you're going to end up in a shit show 3 years from now when you're like, how did this happen? Because nobody was dissenting. And so, again, I don't know him personally, but I would rather hear about the FBI saying we're going to go out of our way to make sure that we're bringing in people into leadership roles with a diverse political leanings. Either they're apolitical, and I would love that the most, but that's not realistic in this day and age. But we're going to make sure that we're not excluding people from being promoted who lean right, because they're not going to fit in with the fucking cool kids at the lunch table who lean super hard left.
Well said. And thank you, Corn Pop, for the super sticker. Yeah, I gotta have you back, Vinny. You're great to talk to. Cool. Some people were in the chat saying they appreciated the Bitcoin chat. So any gigs coming up or any particular places people can follow you or listen to you?
Yeah, check me out on Twitter at Proof of Work 1. I also have a podcast myself that I hope this winter to get back into the swing of things. But I tackle like a lot of topics like this, legal discussions. If there's like a big arrest or someone gets shot, I'll usually do a show on sort of a breakdown, a legal analysis of that. And you could check, that's Vinny's Proof of Work podcast. That's on YouTube, Spotify, wherever else. Definitely, be sure to subscribe to that channel, because it's something I want to do more of, especially if people enjoy it. And then, at Proof of Work 1. And then I think I'm back at Governor's this weekend. So if you live locally, look it up online, govs.com for tickets. I'm not sure which club I'm at. I'm thinking it's going to be McGuire's again, but I'll be at one of the clubs this weekend. So come check it out. I always love talking to people after the show about whatever.
Awesome.
So thanks for having me.
And your wife is delightful. I always enjoy her.
She's
at
great.
All stages of drink. She's
Which is your favorite stage of
I think I like after drink 3, but not after drink 5. No, I'm kidding. She's
Same.
Great.
Yeah, no, that's where my threshold is. So I'm glad you said that.
Oh my God, Vinny, you're the best. Everybody follow Vinny. If you're on Long Island, go see him perform live, and we will have to do this again sometime. Thank you to everybody in the chat for your comments and questions, and we will see you next time. Bye.
All right.